Hello, dreamers, and welcome to the 310th episode of California Dreaming. I'm your host, Roseanne, and I want to start off by thanking you all for listening. I want to take a moment to tell you how you can help support this podcast. This is an independent show, which means I depend on you to help keep it going, and there are a number of ways that you can help. You can leave a nice rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or whichever platforms you listen to your shows on. It makes it a little easier for new listeners to find us. You can follow the show on Facebook, Instagram, and X. And if you happen to have a spare $1 or $2 each month, you can become a subscriber over on Patreon, where for starting at just $1 a month, you will enjoy access to dozens of full-length episodes that you won't hear anywhere else. And we just finished a month-long 16-part series on the 2011 murder of 15-year-old Seth Jackson over there in Florida. He was killed by what is known as the Springfield Six. There were 6 co-defendants in that case. They've all been convicted, and you will hear from all of them if you listen to this series. Up next, we're going to have some companion episodes to go along with the most recent case that we talked about here in 4 parts. The case involving Leticia Stout and the 2020 murder of her 11-year-old stepson, Gannon. There is so much more over on Patreon, so please, if you have a moment, follow the link in the show notes and check it out for yourself. In some of the multi-part series that I have on Patreon, you may find that the first episode is open to the public for free. So you might want to check that out to see if it's something that you might be interested in subscribing to. You can also make a contribution through PayPal and Cash App. The links to everything, like I said, are in the show notes. This week, I would like to give a big thank you to Ruth Ann S. in Tennessee, Susie W. in El Cajon, California, Adrian H. in Colorado, Laura E. in San Diego, California, Scott L. in Clovis, California, John F. in Florida, Melissa G. in Ohio, Rhiannon S. in South Carolina, May O., Rebecca R., and Kelly B. in Pennsylvania. Much of the information that I'm going to share with you in this series of episodes is coming from a 3-part docuseries on Hulu that premiered at the end of February of 2025. So I am expecting this episode to be about 3 parts also. The documentary is A Devil in the Family, and it recounts the case of Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt. I'm going to share some of what happens in the documentary, but also interject information from articles and court documents related to this case. There was an evidence dump, which also happened in February of 2025, that included Ruby's handwritten journals that were seized. I'm going to go through parts of that weren't redacted, but when I went to YouTube, I found that there were a good amount of content creators who read through the journal entries, but it sounded really choppy when you figure in the redactions, and also the fact that Ruby's handwriting, some parts of it, it's not terrible handwriting, but some of the words are illegible. I do have a typed out transcription of her journal writings that I was going to try to reference, but I probably won't go through the whole entire thing because it wasn't a fun listen. It was kind of choppy and weird when you factor in the redactions and some of the illegible handwriting. I probably, like I said, won't go through the entire thing, but instead pull out some key parts that stood out to me. One last thing before we get started, I must provide you with this warning. This episode may contain graphic details involving extremely severe child abuse. And while the focus of this episode is meant to discuss how exactly the story evolved over the course of 6 or 7 years into what we became aware of when the story broke in August of 2023, August 30th to be exact, we may talk about some of the details of the abuse that occurred, which may be disturbing for some listeners. In the past, I'll usually bypass some of the worst details when it comes to these types of cases involving child abuse. But if there is anything particularly troubling that I decide to leave in, I will provide further in-episode warnings and timestamps to jump to. Listener discretion is strongly advised. So let's get on with today's story.
911, the address of your emergency. Okay, and the phone number you're calling from. Tell me exactly what's happened.
I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here at my front door asking for help. And he's said he just came from a neighbor's house, and we know there's been problems at this neighbor's house. He's emaciated, he's got tape around his legs, he's hungry, and he's thirsty.
Okay. Is your door locked?
No, I'm sitting outside with him on the front patio, and he asked us to call the police. So he's very afraid. What's your last name? He's 12 years old.
Okay, and can you ask him his date of birth?
Can you tell me your birthday?
Okay, and are the neighbors out of their home, or is anybody looking for them that you can see?
No. Our homes are far enough away. I'm not sure. How did you get out of the house?
Porch. He went out.
He says you just left through the porch at the neighbor's house. Her name is Jodi Hildebrandt, and she lives 2 doors up the street.
Out here in Cayenne, the houses are far apart.
Yeah, out here in Cayenne, the houses are far apart, so he walked just under a block to get to our house. He rang my doorbell and asked me to call the police.
Does he seem to be under the influence of drugs or alcohol?
I don't think so, but he's very thirsty and...
Need an ambulance?
I don't think he needs an ambulance. I'll let the cops decide that, but his ankles are taped up and he won't tell us why.
Okay.
But he has duct taped around each ankle. Yeah, there's sores around them. I think there's a good chance he's been... Oh, and he has them around his ankles. I mean, his wrists as well. Okay, this boy has been... This kid has obviously been... I think he's been detained. He's obviously covered in wounds.
Okay. Let's get the paramedics headed over that way, okay?
Oh, that's a good idea, too.
Let's see. Has he told you where his mom or dad are?
Haven't asked him that. Yeah. You know where your mommy and...
I really got you.
Yeah, I'm sure that doesn't matter, son. Do you know where your mom and dad are?
Well, actually, I don't know where my mom is, but I do know where my dad is. He's not anywhere here. Really, nowhere here.
Okay. No, he doesn't seem to. He says he knows where his mom is, but...
he doesn't know where his dad is.
That's correct.
I do know where my dad is.
Is his mom home?
He doesn't live.
He just says he doesn't live around here.
Okay. Is his mom in this area?
Is your mom around here? Have you seen her lately?
No,
He doesn't know where she is right now.
Does he know his mom's name?
What's your mom's name? Ruby Franke? Ruby Franke is his mom's name.
Okay. How do you spell the last name?
Franke.
Franke.
Okay. And does she live in the area?
No, I'm not sure where she lives. He's trying to help us, but he's...
That's okay. We don't want to stress him out too much. The officers will go over all these questions with him anyway. I just want to stay on the phone with you until we get some help there, okay?
Yeah,
What's your name?
My name is...
Can you ask him if any other children were in the home he came from?
Okay. Was there any other kids up at Jodi's house? Anybody else? No. How old? Yeah, this is the 30th of, the 29th of August.
It'll be the 30th of August.
The days.
10 and 14, and they're still at this house.
Are they tied up as well?
What's the deal with? Are they being held? Do they have wounds on them as well?
Nothing bad going on with us.
Okay.
It's just the...
Okay. So they're able to walk around the house and everything?
Yeah. Everything.
Well, okay. He says everything's fine with them. Grain of salt.
Okay.
He says what's happened to him is his fault.
They're coming to you as quick as they can, okay?
Okay,
You're
yeah.
doing really well.
Yeah,
I just want to make sure.
He's fine. I've got him sitting here. My wife, he got him water and giving him something to eat because he's hungry and just a young man. He's hearing his stocking feet. So he escaped.
Well, I'm glad that he was able to make it to
They're on their way.
so he could be safe. They should just be pulling up now. Let me know when they're with you, okay?
Will do. I hear a car, but they're not coming on the driveway. You did good. Enjoy that banana, okay?
Yeah, he just
did the right
turned on a
thing.
few seconds ago, so he might be waiting for his partner. I'm not sure.
Is Jodi up there right now?
Yeah.
Okay. Jodi Hildebrandt is up there right now.
Okay.
So she may come looking for him here soon, but he's not going to, obviously. We need the cops here as soon as possible.
I'm just asking where he is now.
Yeah, she's a bad lady. We didn't realize how bad.
I'm just asking where he is. Well, it sounds like he's making a phone call real quick to his sergeant. He is going to head up.
Okay. All right. Well, if we have to take him inside the house, we will. We're just sitting outside right now because we have chairs out here, and it was convenient.
That's okay. If anything, he's sitting out down your driveway and keeping an eye on the house. So if that's where you feel safe, that's where the child feels safe, and let's just stay where you're at.
Yeah.
You're
I
on
think
the
we're doing this. Yes.
Does he have anything with him?
But, no, he's wearing a long sleeve shirt and shorts, and it's way too big for him.
Can you tell me what color the shirt and shorts are?
Okay, the ambulance is here.
Okay.
So.
Are they with you?
No, they're just not getting out of the truck.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll go ahead and I'll let you go then. You did a great job.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Bye.
I was wondering if you could do me 2 favors. That's what we heard that emaciated boy say to the older gentleman when he answered his front door. Well, what are they? The man asked, almost with a slightly annoyed tone, curious as to what the 2 things the child needed were. The child replied, taking me to the nearest police station. And then he said, well, actually just one is fine. At the time I first saw this video, I wondered what the second favor may have been. Was he going to ask for some water? This was August 30th, 2023 in Utah. It's very, very hot. Maybe he wanted something, anything to put into his stomach. Perhaps he wanted a pair of shoes as he came over only wearing socks on his feet. But then perhaps he thought better of it, that maybe they'd have some water and something for him to eat once he got to the police station. Maybe he thought asking the stranger for anything more would be too much. I mean, they didn't know one another, even though they were kind of neighbors. There seemed to be some distance between the place, and you'll come to find that there is no reason why any of the neighbors would have any idea who this boy is or what he is doing there. Maybe the boy second-guessed himself. Maybe he was afraid of offending this man. After all, we're going to come to find just how much the significant adults in this little boy's life gave him absolutely no reason to feel comfortable about trusting anybody. While it is easy to find the names and ages of all 6 of the children at the center of the story online, at the time, this boy was referred to as R. You may hear his name throughout, but he's still a minor, and what we're going to do is go ahead and call him R throughout this episode as well. I'll do my best to help keep all of the children straight as we go along. I'll tell you a little bit about each one of them. I'll tell you where they were at the time this story broke, their order of their birth. I'll be sure to include reminders of all of this as well, but in relation to this case, the 2 youngest children were the ones who we would eventually see on these Ring doorbells and soon police body cams, R and his younger sister, who has been referred to as E. At the time the story hit the media, R had just turned 12 the month before, in July of 2023, and E was just 2 days away from her 10th birthday. So who was this very frail-looking boy ringing his neighbor's camera doorbell? What brought him to that particular house on that particular day? Let's talk about that. In order to know who R is and why he was ringing a neighbor's doorbell, asking for a ride to the nearest police station, we need to talk about his family. And in order to talk about his family, we need to reach back in time a little bit to early 2015, when the matriarch of the large family of 8 uploaded her very first video blog to YouTube, or from this point forward, we're just going to refer to it as a vlog. We do all know now who Ruby Franke is. And there were actually millions of people who knew of her long before her second to youngest son introduced himself to the world by way of his neighbor's Ring doorbell. I did Google Ruby Franke's neighbor who called 911, but the bold result at the top of my Google search read, Ruby Franke's neighbor is unbeknownst. So, we don't know his name. I didn't know who Ruby Franke was until this story began trickling out of the city of Ivins, Utah. But like I was saying, some of you may have heard of Ruby and her family prior to that day in August of 2023. Because in 2015, Ruby launched her YouTube channel that she called 8 Passengers, where she chronicled the day-to-day life in the Franke home. And we're going to talk about how the idea to start the channel came about and how it quickly evolved into a very successful and lucrative venture for Ruby and her family. And we are going to trace Ruby's meteoric rise to become one of the most popular Mormon vloggers on YouTube through its decline to its eventual end and to where Ruby would pivot to next, until it all precipitously crashed and burned with one ring of a doorbell. There is little information out there about Ruby Franke's early life. There may be some details that we'll discover throughout the documentary. Ruby's eldest daughter, Sherry, she's actually the eldest of all 6 of the children. Sherry Franke has written a book, and she does talk about Ruby's upbringing, and they kind of hint at where all of this mess may have come from, how it all started, why it all happened. But as far as Google is concerned, there isn't all that much. Even Ruby's Wikipedia page doesn't have a whole lot, and there isn't even an early life section on her Wikipedia. They don't even have her full birth date, but it is quick to find just a couple of results down from the top. Ruby was one of 4 daughters born in Utah on January 18, 1982, making her 43 years old today. She was Ruby Griffiths before she met and married Kevin Franke. But as stated, the story broke at the end of August of 2023, and before the end of the year, Ruby would once again be Ruby Griffiths, as her marriage to Kevin would come to a quick, unceremonious end, kind of like her channel on YouTube, kind of like her freedom. Not a whole lot is known about Kevin, the patriarch of the Franke family. He seemed as shocked as everyone else across the country when he learned of the atrocities his children had been subjected to. He has faced a lot of public criticism and judgment. Some harsh things have been said about him in regards to his ignorance as to what was going on, alleged ignorance as to what was going on with his own children, and his inexplicable disconnection from the family unit. The public was collectively wondering, how could he not know? And I remember thinking the same thing. I saw some police body cam footage, I think, of him talking to police on the 2020 episode that came out about this case in March of 2024, so about a year ago. And I kind of understood, based on what he said, was the fact that he kind of looked like a deer caught in the headlights, or at least that's what he was trying to come across like. He was gobsmacked to learn of what was happening to his children. I don't think he knew the extent of what was going on when his wife decided to move the 4 remaining children that were in her care over to this compound, this isolated compound in Ivins, Utah, into a property that was owned by a therapist or former therapist named Jodi Hildebrandt. We had a little bit of an understanding about how he actually had no idea why he was able to claim that, how he was basically exiled from the home due to his admission that he had viewed or had in his possession some sexually explicit materials, which is a big no-no if you are a Mormon. I don't have a particularly strong opinion about Kevin Franke. I kind of thought maybe this documentary and him participating in it and him willing to show his face and speak about what happened, it might have helped his public image a little bit. I asked the listeners who are in the Facebook group and on Instagram their opinions of Kevin Franke. I got a whole bunch of answers, and I'm going to share those with you at some point. Maybe not in this episode because it's getting kind of long, and I'm going to let that post percolate a little bit more. So maybe in the next one, when we do talk more about Kevin Franke, I will put up some of your answers to your opinions as to whether or not he was complicit. Should he be prosecuted? Is he just as guilty as his wife? We'll talk about that. But since we brought it up, we're going to talk about how the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints views sexually explicit material, pornography, and stuff of that nature. According to a 2021 online article in the Salt Lake City Tribune, the Mormon views on the subject of sexually explicit materials are summed up in 2 words: shun pornography. The article is about how religious leaders are changing how they talk about the topic, and it says, quote, shun pornography. That command hasn't changed in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but I'll be calling that the LDS Church from this point forward. What has shifted is the way the faith's leaders have addressed the issue. Gone are the fiery sermons about deviant, damnable, and destructive effects of porn addiction, replaced by kinder, gentler, more focused counsel to help affected members stop consuming it, most of whom should not be considered addicted. So basically, these Mormon religious leaders, when speaking to congregants about pornography, they'd say the consumption of this type of explicit material perpetuates lust, breaks down moral standards, that people feed their sexual desires through their addiction to this type of material. The behavior escalates as a person grows increasingly desensitized to it, which leads to this crossing over into actual sexual behaviors and a desire to act out what they've been watching, that pornography is vulgar and evil, that they become addicted to it, their desire for it escalates, they become desensitized to it, and then they act out what they witnessed, that it is the leading cause of homosexuality, that it's dangerous, addictive, and brings about sexual urges and fantasies that ultimately lead to deviant sexual behavior, and that pornography has done nothing but lead to catastrophe, grief, suffering, heartache. It destroys families, breaks apart marriages, that it is vicious, corrosive, and destructive, one of the most damning influences on earth. So, yeah, they frown on this sort of material. While the way the message is being delivered to church members struggling with any level of interest in sexually explicit materials may be leaning towards a more gentle manner, there's always going to be a significant portion of those who practice the Mormon faith who subscribe to the old school fire and brimstone ways of the teachings. And we're going to come to find that an interest in pornography played a significant role in not only removing Kevin Franke from the family home, but we've come to find that the Franke's eldest son would also be told to leave for various reasons, but that was also mentioned as one of them. Many of the questions that a lot of us had at the time that this story first broke, to even after it's made its way through the court system, many of us were still left wondering, how did these people end up like this? How did we go from 8 passengers to 2 prisoners and a pair of abusers? Later on, we're going to learn that during the time that all 6 of the children were participating in 8 passengers, it was kind of like all of them were prisoners to an extent. Some of our questions have been answered in the time since. Last month, in February of 2025, the Hulu miniseries documentary entitled Devil in the Family, The Fall of Ruby Franke, that premiered, like I said, on Hulu, and it cleared up some questions. If you watched, then you know that we finally heard from the dad, Kevin, and the 2 eldest children. And they should really be the only 2 that identify by their name instead of just by their first initial, because the others are still minors, but they're all out there. However, because the bulk of this surrounds the 2 oldest children, they were the biggest personalities, we'll just talk about them the most, and they're the only ones that participated in the documentary. The now 22-year-old eldest of 6 is Sherry Franke. The second eldest, and incidentally the one who was the most popular of the children on their YouTube channel during its run, was the now 20-year-old Chad Franke. Sherry Franke has also authored a book entitled The House of My Mother, A Daughter's Quest for Freedom. I mentioned it in the opening. I do have a copy of the book. It was sent to me by listener Nate B., but I haven't read it yet. As I said in the opening, much of the information I'm going to talk to you about today comes from the miniseries, which gives us some really good insight into how all this came to be. If I was to read that book, I'd want to share the whole thing with you, and we'd be sitting here talking about Ruby Franke until 2026. So I'm just going to maybe take a look at the book a little bit later on. And if there's anything, significant, or that maybe I could possibly throw together an episode about the book later on, I will. But for now, we're just going to focus on what we learned in the docuseries. So where did this all start? This story, what we know of it, what most of us knew about it, began at the front door of Neighbor Unbeknownst. We began hearing the news coming out of the state of Utah. A popular former YouTube influencer, a family vlogger, the momfluencer for lack of a better word, known for posting videos of the day-to-day lives of her and her husband and their 6 children, where she talked about parenting, marriage, childcare, travel. She had tips and all sorts of cute Pinterest type stuff. Ruby, the one who started the channel, she launched it, had been arrested along with her so-called family therapist, but lately she has been referred to as Ruby's business partner. They were both charged with 6 counts of child abuse on August 30th, 2023. That therapist, I mentioned her name earlier, is Jodi Hildebrandt. In the days and weeks following, as the horrifying details of what went on inside the home where Ruby was living with this therapist, along with the 4 youngest of her children, at the time there were a 16-year-old daughter that we'll refer to as A, 14-year-old daughter we'll refer to as J, 12-year-old son, who we mentioned is R, and 1 more daughter, the youngest, who was 9, about to turn 10, a couple days after the story broke. We've already said we're going to call E. R having shown up on the front doorstep of the neighbor is what triggered a call to law enforcement. Because R had indicated he had another sibling, possibly even more, still inside the home, this situation was elevated to what was considered to be, quote, exigent circumstances, which allows police to gain entry to the home by force if necessary without a search warrant. Based on what they were told by R and the condition they found R to be in, this was determined to be one of those exigent circumstances. Soon, the house would be surrounded by police, and like it or not, they were going to gain entry. No warrant in hand. I felt like it was appropriate to play for you at the opening of this episode the audio of R taking a chance. A risk, really, to get to the neighbors. He was saving his life and the life of his sister. He was determined to raise the alarm as to what was happening to them inside that house. We learned in the wake of this breaking story that his 2 older sisters, the ones that were in the middle, A and J, were still in Ruby's custody, but they did not appear to have been subjected to the same treatment as the 2 youngest, R and E. And as I've gone through this documentary and learned what I've learned in researching for this episode, R and E seem to be the most difficult behavior-wise. They're just a little bit more rambunctious, and they weren't very cooperative, especially when Ruby was actively vlogging on 8 Passengers. Sherry and Chad were already out of the home, attending college. The only children who were actively being abused at the time. But make no mistake, all 6 of these children were abused on some level by Ruby Franke. And it was going on long before she met Jodi Hildebrandt. It just wasn't to the extreme extent that it was when the 2 youngest children were discovered at Jodi's house. On the audio clip that you heard towards the beginning of this episode, the neighbor did call 911, and even this man, who seemed to be an older gentleman, possibly even retired, even he had a hard time holding it together as he made this very emotional phone call. You can clearly hear him fighting, having a breakdown on the phone. A woman who appears to be the neighbor's wife or partner, she comes out onto the porch and describes what she observes in terms of the condition the boy was in. They let it be known that he's emaciated, that he has duct tape around his ankles and around his wrists, along with some kind of related sores and injuries. Literally, we find out later on from the first responders that the flesh underneath the duct tape, it was also wrapped in saran wrap, and this moisture was causing this young man's flesh to literally rot underneath those dressings. They relay to the dispatcher that he's in bad shape, that he's obviously been, they use the word detained. I really feel like this gentleman was at a loss. They're obviously abused, obviously neglected. They're hungry, they're injured, starved. The Ring doorbell camera footage, it really hits hard, and I've watched it several times, and it doesn't get any easier when it comes to children. Some things you just don't get desensitized to. And we really shouldn't, actually. This type of case, this type of parenting, not parenting, actually, is is the type of extreme child abuse that we're just never wired. We're not supposed to be wired to be used to something like that. As for me, I did not know who Ruby Franke was prior to the story becoming national news, a year and a half ago. Oh, it'll be almost 2 years in August at the end of this summer. I wasn't subscribed to her channel. I don't really watch vlogger type videos, and I don't watch or follow any sort of lifestyle type influencers, whether it's YouTube or a reality show or a podcast, anything like that. I'm not interested in people's lives. And if I'm being perfectly blunt, I'm more so interested in people's deaths, if I'm being honest. And I remember through the years, every once in a while, my daughter would bring up, quote, this family I follow on YouTube or this family I follow on TikTok. And she's also into reality shows and housewives, Kardashians, all that nonsense. And for me, this all really has to do with wanting to know truth and facts. And it's hard to tell what's real and what's staged when it comes to these social media famous type influencers, popular, famous, whatever you want to call it. This case here with Ruby, it would be an extreme example of that. It's a reality check on reality TV where what we see online is very, very different from what goes on offline in their real life realities. In the docuseries, we get to hear from Kevin. Within the first couple minutes of the documentary, he was left with all the damage control that his wife left behind in her wake. He's got 6 kids that he has to work at reconciling everything that happened in his absence. I'm not going to sit here and point fingers or blame. In fact, I kind of thought that going on the documentary sort of, helped Kevin's public image. However, even though he did participate, and you'll hear the documentarian ask questions occasionally throughout, he's off camera, he's sitting across and doing the interview. He challenges him, like, you really didn't know? Like, really? So he's put to task to it, and he does include some unseen footage of Kevin and his awareness of how Ruby was treating the kids, and he just was sort of passive about it and let her run the show. But I did think it did him some good coming forward and giving us a small glimpse of all this from his perspective and sharing his experiences. He just comes across to me as a weak person. It kind of reminds me of Keith Papini and just how these kind of goofy, dorky, nerdy guys happen to be able to land like a really beautiful wife, and they'll just take whatever they have to take as long as this woman will be with them, It's kind of sad because women like Sherry Papini and Ruby Franke, they have to have a weak husband. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to be their authentic selves. Controlling, manipulative, narcissistic. They need a husband that's going to allow them to be the center of the universe. And I find both Keith Papini and Kevin Franke to have been treating their respective wives like they were subservient to them. They weren't treated as equals, and look how both of their stories ended. While I never really formed a strong opinion about what happened to R and E in terms of how much is to be blamed on Kevin, I did wonder why he was so disconnected and detached from his entire family. I didn't quite understand how all that transpired. At the time, we got the sense that the other person arrested and charged alongside Ruby for these atrocities was a big part of the reason for what ended up happening to Kevin and the separation from his wife, his children, and his home. and that's Jodi Hildebrandt. We had the impression that she's the one who drove the wedge between Ruby and Kevin. The documentary confirmed that this woman did in fact have a very strong influence over Ruby and the decisions that she made regarding her entire family. And while I can see this woman used power, influence, manipulation, fear, and religion against not just Ruby, but other clients in the past, ultimately, it does not in any way excuse away Ruby's actions, her behaviors, the things that she did that led her second youngest child, R, to have finally reached a point where he could no longer take this abuse, the neglect, the pain, the starvation. It was nothing less than torture what these women did to R and E. And I guess I didn't realize the time frame of all this, but it was only about 3 months that this abuse was going on, at least inside that house that was owned by Jodi. They had just moved there in May. This all broke in August. So yeah, a minimum of 3 months, and that was it. That's all it took for R to be like, I'm done. I need to get the hell out of this house. And that's exactly what he did. Until Ruby launched her YouTube channel and in time began making money hand over fist, Kevin had been the sole breadwinner. To support a family of 8, Kevin had to have a well-paying job, and he did, in a career in civil and environmental engineering. According to his profile on the famouspeople.com website, he was working, and may currently still be working, as an assistant professor at BYU in Provo, Utah. Prior to that, he was a geotechnical engineer from 2006 to 2012, where he was involved in some notable projects such as the Interstate 15 Core project in Utah County and the Kennecott, Utah Copper project in Salt Lake County. Kevin participated in the Hulu documentary and was interviewed. One of the first things he said was, "In many ways, we were the perfect family. The devil knocked and we opened the door." Kevin and his large family would settle in the city of Springville, which is part of the Provo-Orem metropolitan area and is described as a bedroom community. Commuters who work in Provo and Salt Lake City make up a good portion of the Springville population. The documentary makes this city out to be like some sort of weird Mormon utopia. Some residents were interviewed for the documentary and said that it's a place where people tend to stay. Often you're raised there and you end up staying there to raise their own families. It's considered a tight-knit community where the general consensus, the state of mind of the people who live there, is to constantly strive for perfection. I don't know a great deal about the Mormon religion outside of what I learned from crime. We've covered a couple cases, including Glenn and Justin Helzer. We talked about the two of them in episode 262, entitled The Tale of the Second Coming of Manson. They're the ones that started a Mormon spin-off cult called Children of Thunder. I've never covered her, but there's always Jodi Arias. We won't soon forget her. I just realized, because I don't know, I was just letting a playlist of some of Dr. Grande's analysis. He's that like therapist or psychologist that really hates Dr. Phil. He has a YouTube channel where he talks about these cases. He talked about, I kind of got through the playlist and heard him talking about the Jodi Arias case. She's 45 years old now. She's about to turn 45. Like, I can't believe this case is that old, because I remember her being in her late 20s, and this was quite some time ago. She was born in 1980, so it's been a good, God, he was killed in 2008. My math skills are really crappy, but 17 years ago this June will be the anniversary of Travis Alexander's murder. So Jodi Arias, she had a thing for Travis Alexander, who was Mormon, who appeared to be quite devout on the surface, but not so much behind closed doors. Jodi famously converted to Mormonism for Travis, but he did not view her as marriage material. However, he did carry on a very illicit sexual relationship with Jodi Arias. Ugh, I just realized there's 2 Jodis in this episode. Jodi Arias, despite the fact that Travis had no intentions of ever marrying her. Then there was good old Lori Vallow Daybell and her 5th husband, Chad. Great, another Chad. Okay. So, anyway, both Lori and Chad were raised in the LDS church, but Chad was an extremist who, when he met Lori, was so taken by her beauty that he was convinced that they had been together in previous lives, or at least that's what he told her. And they were like eternal partners or whatever. I just watched Lori Vallow Daybell's interview with Keith Morrison on Dateline last week. So she's fresh on the mind too. She's about to go on trial in Arizona for the murder of her 4th husband. I've lost count. I'm pretty sure it's 4th. Charles Vallow. Remember all that mess? And she's also facing trial for that random shooting that happened to her niece's ex-husband. Oh God, I can't think of his name right now. Bordeaux something. I can't. I'm so sorry. I'm drawing a blank right now because I'm so focused on Ruby Franke. But anyway, Chad was like this doomsday, end of times religious author. When he met Lori, he was just so attracted to her that his way of getting to her, they were both married, of course, was that he was convinced that they had been together in previous lives, eternal partners. The problem was that they did have spouses, and Lori had 2 young children that she was still responsible for. And in order to clear the path for their divine eternal romance, everybody keeping them from one another had to die. In fact, I find that there are some parallels between the Vallow Daybell case and the Franke case. They both leaned hard on religion being the driving force behind the criminal acts that they were accused of. So when interviewed, there were some residents of Springville in the documentary. They say that they were raised there. They say you become best friends with your neighbors, and the desire is for their children to be able to have that same experience growing up. So they stay and repeat the cycle in order to give them the same safe, idyllic upbringing that they had. But they say that there's a caveat. Living in Springville, you find that everybody works towards perfection. And the neighborhood that the Frankes lived in was so quiet and so peaceful and everyone knew one another. Everyone was basically close or knew of each other at least. So much so that it garnered the name Happy Valley. And it kind of sort of the pictures that they shown, the videos of the area from above and whatnot, it kind of reminds me of the neighborhood in Edward Scissorhands. Everyone has to have the best manicured lawns. All the dads have to go to work at the same time. All the moms stay home and raise kids and cook and bake and throw Avon parties. It's almost nauseating, and it kind of has you wondering even more so what these people are like when nobody's watching. Jodi Arias, Lori Vallow Daybell, Ruby Franke. Like, yeah, busy playing Mormon on the outside, but crazy psycho bitch on the inside, right? But anyways, yeah, that's where the Frankes lived. And the people interviewed about Springville, the neighbors, they had nothing but amazing things to say. But when they interviewed Springville resident and licensed therapist Brannon Patrick on this documentary, he stated, "It's a great community. I live here myself, and a lot of people are happy in Happy Valley in many ways. It's a great place to live, and they are truly happy." But then you hear the voice of the interviewer or the documentarian who, after a short silence, said, "There's a but." And he laughed. There is a but. They truly are happy, but and I got to be careful what I say, they're truly happy, but they're stuck in a box. There's a bubble, and there's a certain culture here, a culture of perfectionism, wanting to look a certain way, wanting to be good, wanting to be more perfect. And the reason why is because Utah is the capital for the Mormon church. Mormons are taught that in order to get to the highest degree of glory, you should strive for perfection. And we are always supposed to be doing missionary work to show the world how perfect our lives are. And that's a tremendous amount of pressure to live under, dreamers. Either you're going to own it or it's going to own you. But that's just my opinion. It is such a high standard to have to live by that I really find it unsurprising when there exists a small part of that community that simply can't handle the social pressures and end up deviating from that impossibly lofty standard of perfection. And then something happens. Somebody snaps. Something catastrophic occurs, and then secrets get exposed. Now, like I said, I don't know a whole lot about the ins and outs of the Mormon religion, and the opinions that I have had over the years as I've looked at cases that involved the LDS church that we've covered, I have nothing against this or any other religion, and we try to keep the discussion about religion to a minimum and based on facts. The problems tend to arise when there's like this extreme offshoot of any religion. People can interpret things any which way they choose to, and when that happens, we often see the word cult being used to describe these derivatives of the religion. Lori and Chad Daybell are often described as cultish type people. They saw themselves as deities, and in order to legitimize their status, they have to have followers, which is what they were attempting to obtain. And if you believe in them and you follow their philosophies and teachings, then Lori and Chad labeled you as light. If you gave them any kind of lip or pushback or attitude, they labeled you as dark. And if Lori and Chad believed you to be dark, then your days were numbered. You are not a part of the quote-unquote chosen or whatever. I am really watering this down a lot. But it wasn't until I watched this documentary that I realized how much the Mormon religion was going to be leaned on as a justification for what happened in this case. And really, not that there is a justification. Maybe that's not the right word. Perhaps they leaned on religion as a reason for what happened. And really, this has nothing to do with being Mormon. That was just a part of the reasoning behind something that is absolutely unreasonable, if that makes sense. Imagine being in this constant quest for absolute perfection while raising 6 children ranging in age from 10 to 20. It would drive me mad. I have no doubt about that. When I taught preschool, I found there to be basically 2, possibly 3 types of parents that require daycare, mostly 2 though. There is a distinct difference between these 2 types. There are parents who were either very young or unprepared for parenthood. The mom and dad weren't even necessarily in a relationship. They may have been broken up. They may still be together, but struggling. They work full time and they scrape together the money in order to bring their kid to daycare. Just working hard and trying to keep it afloat, to keep it together, stay above water. And they're just generally doing the best that they can as parents and with what they have to work with. And their kids, to be honest, and this is my honest opinion, are generally really well adjusted. They are used to being around the important adults in their lives. Their parents tend to have a decent support system around them. There's lots of family involved because they're struggling to do it on their own. And their kids are pretty happy. They get along with other children. They seem to have more experiences outside of their core family at home with other kids, with other adults and their teachers. And The kids are just used to their lives being a little bit hectic, a little bit busy, but fun and balanced. And then there are the parents who spend the better part of their lives putting higher education and their careers ahead of everything. They do things in sort of a quote unquote traditional order, if there is such a thing. They graduate from college and they don't just get jobs, they find careers. And they begin looking for a life partner, a spouse. They plan their wedding, they get married, they put a down payment on a home they've saved up for, suitable for the number of kids that they have on their agenda, equipped with the white picket fence and all. They plan the conception date, they schedule the birthing date, they hire nannies, particularly during the first couple years. And once these kids are potty trained, they look for the best, most reputable academy to send their toddlers to. And once they've applied and they're accepted, over brunch and Pilates classes, they brag to all their socialite friends that their babies attend the most prestigious daycare in the land. Those kids are spoiled, bratty, whiny, tantrumy little assholes with names like Brock and Tanner and Bryce. I'm so sorry to all the Brocks, Tanners, and Bryces out there, but you know, if you know, you know. They're like little douchebags in the making. I'm so kidding, but you know what I mean. They're difficult. They're bratty. They don't listen. The parents of these children tend to be a little bit on the older side, and they usually are like these type A personalities. They go through life at a really fast pace. They always have this sense of urgency. They're aggressive, competitive. They have a strong desire to win at everything. They're short-tempered, achievement-driven, always multitasking, highly ambitious, organized, orderly, focused, goal-oriented, outgoing, socially active, constantly striving for perfection, and they're controlling. So when you're a 2 or 3-year-old kid, and their main goal in life is autonomy, which we encourage as we raise them, but if they spend the first 3 years of their lives having every single one of their decisions being made by their parents, usually the mother, when they get to school, they tend to have a very difficult time transitioning into a group social setting. They don't know how to make choices and decisions on their own because their parents controlled every aspect of their lives. And the fallout is they become some of the most difficult children to deal with in a school or group setting. They realize they're not under their parents' rule and influence anymore, at least for the time being, and they will start to test the boundaries. And for a teacher, it's a lot of extra work because it's these kids who tend to take away from the class as a whole when the teacher has to be on them constantly. I find Ruby Franke and Kevin Franke to an extent to be this type of parent, but on an extreme level. Bear in mind, as Ruby raised the 6 of them, her ultimate goal was perfection. To be the perfect wife, to be the perfect mom, to have the perfect house and the perfect kids. Everything had to be perfect in Happy Valley by any means necessary. I think we can generally agree that the Mormon community typically sticks to their own. Of course, we know Utah to be the central location for the LDS Church, with nearly 68% of the population of the state identifying as Mormon, and they've branched out across the west and southwestern parts of the United States. After Utah, the states with the highest Mormon population are California, Idaho, Arizona, Texas, Washington, and Nevada. Therapist Brandon Patrick, who I mentioned earlier, described Springville as a bubble. I'd say the same could be said for the Mormon religion as a whole. And please understand, dreamers, these are my opinions, but I tend to view the members of the Mormon Church to be quite insular. And that's kind of why I explained to you the generalizations that I made regarding the 2 types of children that I could categorize them basically falling into with their parenting styles. With the kids of these strict Mormon families being similar to the children of these very high-achieving, goal-oriented type A parents. I'm not an expert to be sitting here assigning personality types like I know what I'm talking about, but we do get a glimpse of what the Franke family life was like, especially when the documentary shows unedited clips of Ruby Franke making videos for her channel. The stuff that ended up on the cutting room floor, the stuff that Ruby did not want the world to see, we get to see some of it, snippets of it, of her type A-ness on full display, and what life was really like when the cameras were off, behind closed doors, under the rule of their mother. Because members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints have historically been kind of in a bubble of their own there in Utah, and the spattering of pretty little cities like Springville or Happy Valley, as they like to call it, this community really leaned in on the idea of being an influencer when the trend emerged. Mormons do missionary work all the time. We've seen them walking around or on their bikes with their little dress shirts and ties going door to door and talking to people on the street, spreading the word. Brandon Patrick said it. They're always doing this. So once the vast reach of the internet was realized, many in the Mormon community turned to social media as a tool to further spread the word and to do God's work using the internet. It was a fast, easy, and inexpensive way to reach thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people, even millions, as compared to riding around on bikes, praying with strangers, and passing out pamphlets. As Brandon Patrick put it, Utah has become the epicenter for family vlogging. Just by sharing their lives on camera, they're thinking they're doing God's work. And from there, the documentary cuts to Ruby setting up her camera in front of what looks like her bedroom, maybe a guest room, her hair perfectly styled, makeup on. The bedroom in the background looks like it just came off the pages of Better Homes and Gardens. And this clip, it's a clip of Ruby trying to get a perfect recording. Now, if influencers posted the real and candid ways in which they record, delete, edit, delete, record, etc., with all of these unscripted moments, outbursts, screw-ups, and the like, I'd probably watch it. But this is what striving for perfection through the lens of Ruby's iPhone looks like. She sets up her phone and she stares at herself. She looks to the side, tousles her hair a little, and says into the camera, "There are about 53 Saturdays in a year." She then reaches to her right and grabs a mason jar with a bunch of marbles in it, and she says, "This jar is holding 100 marbles." But she seems kind of distracted and not really in the moment. She keeps glancing back and forth from the camera to her jar of marbles. She adjusts herself and she repeats, "This jar is holding 100 marbles." It cuts away black, and the screen, there's some words that come on the screen that say, "Ruby Franke was one of YouTube's most popular vloggers. She is now serving up to 30 years in prison for child abuse." What's interesting during the fade out and fading into black, which is exactly 10 seconds, they cut the video of Ruby, but not the audio. And you can hear she's just sitting there in silence as you read the words that are written on the screen. And we can hear her clear her throat, and we can also hear the marbles rattling around in the jar. As the screen fades back out from black, back to Ruby, she says, "Okay, so the last tip I have for calendaring is remembering," and then she pauses. She scratches an itch on her face. She flips her hair back again and continues, "My last tip for," but then she pauses again. And then she doesn't turn her head, but she side-eye glances to her right. And you can see through this entire video that she is pretty irritated and having trouble maintaining her train of thought or getting what she wants to say out in a way that she's satisfied with. In fact, her annoyance is so obvious and palpable, it just about jumps off the screen and slaps you. Imagine the most miserable person in the world trying to pretend like she and her life are the epitome of perfection. What happens when just the slightest thing goes wrong with someone like this, who has to have everything exactly right and the way she wants it, is they tend to fly off the handle really fast. Remember, I mentioned it in the type A personality traits, quick-tempered. They can really very quickly and unexpectedly lose their shit. And that's exactly what's happened here. She side-eye glances to her right. It fades to black as the audio of her video clip is still rolling, and it says across the screen, for the first time, her and her family have agreed to give a detailed account of events. They have provided an archive of over 1,000 hours of unseen footage. We next hear Ruby say, I always ask myself when I schedule a weekend, and it fades back into her video clip. Ruby tilts her jar of marbles sideways. She grabs one marble and holds it in front of the camera as she's speaking and continues, is what I scheduled worth? And she stops again. And in parentheses on the screen, it says in the closed captioning, faint chattering. You can hear voices, children's voices in the background, right before Ruby screams, hey, I'm still recording, come on. Why am I hearing all this noise? Maybe because you have 6 kids, perhaps? I did take a screenshot of Ruby yelling. I'm going to probably use that as a thumbnail for this episode, I think, unless I find something better. You can then hear Kevin say, it's 12:35 and we're getting ready for church, that's why. Ruby quickly gets up. At the same time, her hand covers the camera lens and the video cuts out. It immediately cuts back in to when Ruby comes back to the same spot to start recording again. She tosses her hair around, side to side. She tilts her head with a slight smile, checking her angles, making sure she still looks perfect for whatever she got up to do, probably to go tell her family to shut the hell up. And we watch Ruby sit there primping and preening for a sec. Kevin's voiceover comes on and he says, in our church, in our faith, we were raised to believe that the ultimate thing that you could become in this world is a parent. Ruby adjusted in her seat once again and finally starts talking to the camera. I am a busy mom of 6 children and I am always on the go. From there, she doesn't say anything else. Kevin's voice comes on again as the video cuts to Ruby, fanning out a colorful set of marker pens and grinning with, my instinct is to say something like grinning with delight, but she actually looks kind of weird and possessed as she's waving this fan of pens like they're a bunch of $100 bills or something. It's so weird. And I'm sure this is part of her calendaring vlog that she was creating. And me, dreamers, I like collecting and using fun words like that, putting words together that aren't really words or making verbs out of nouns. But calendaring, no. Ruby is like a walking Pinterest post and it is not fun to watch. I looked around on the internet for the jar of marbles calendaring thing. Like, does she seriously think anyone is going to sit there and pick a marble out of the jar every time we jot something down to do on the weekend and ask myself, is what I scheduled worth what, a marble? She never actually really finished the damn sentence, so I don't know what the flip she was going to say. And I kind of wanted to know, but at the same time, I don't like it, but I want to know. Enlighten me, Pinterest people. I couldn't find it. What's the deal with this jar of marbles? I have to know. But whatever the case, the ways that Ruby was smiling and wide-eyed over these pens, she looks maniacal, to be honest. There's no other word for it. She looks like a friggin' maniac. So as she's fanning her colored pens, Kevin's voiceover comes on again and he says, And Ruby's sole ambition was to be seen as the perfect mom. As Kevin says that, Ruby finishes fanning out her pens and her maniacal smile instantly vanishes. She resets the pens in her hands with a most serious look on her face. She puts the fan of pens back up in front of the camera in between her face and her phone and immediately begins her wide, weird smile again. She's really animated. She does like this really strange Wayne's World style type extreme close up, still with her huge toothy smile and eyes bulging out of her head. It's so bizarre. And then she stops again, and the whole crazed look that she had vanishes back to her normal resting face. Then she divides the pens. Half of them are in her right hand, the other half are in her left hand, and she starts dancing and shimmying around in the chair, shaking up the pens down and around as if they were a pair of maracas, and smiling and trying to act like she's having the flippin' time of her life. But when she stops, you see the real Ruby, irritated, annoyed, impatient. Her vibe is very testy, very disgruntled, and there is nothing wrong with being that way. There are those people who are just naturally grumpy, or some just have a grumpy look about them, kind of like my dog Fred. He always looks grouchy and sad, but that's just the way of the pug. These pathetic looking squishy faces, you know. But to see Ruby go from one extreme to another right before our eyes, she kind of comes across as a nutbag. Kevin's voiceover continues after her sole ambition was to be the perfect mom. He then says, that's all she talked about. That's all she focused on. But she wasn't getting enough praise and attention for it. And so she decided she was going to create a YouTube channel. And when she sets her mind to something, hell and earth combined could not stop her. In the documentary, as Kevin is speaking this, we are looking at Ruby. She continues to look at herself in the camera. She goes from a smiling face to a flat affect and back again several times. It's really strange seeing her face contort so unnaturally from one feeling to another because we don't behave that way. We're literally watching her go from popular internet vlogging supermom to the person who was now sitting in jail for inflicting unspeakable abuse on her children, the very people who made her who she was. Ruby didn't see them as individual, autonomous human beings. She saw them as property. She saw them as props for her to use, control, and manipulate in order to portray herself to the world as the perfect lifestyle and family vlogger. As the documentary cuts away from Ruby striking poses in front of her camera to Kevin sitting there being interviewed, after he said that hell and earth combined could not stop her, he then says she was going to make her vlog bigger and better than everybody else's. So dreamers, this past January of 2025 marked the 10th anniversary of the very first video Ruby uploaded to her YouTube channel. The kids from oldest to youngest were about to turn the following ages. Sherry was 12, Chad was 10, A was 8, J was 6, R was 4, and E was 2. Yeah, she had the kids every other year for a decade, starting in 2003 with Sherry, her last being E in 2013. They're roughly 2 years apart, give or take a month or a few months here and there. But yeah, by the end of this year, 2025, that this episode is being released, the children will be 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, and 22. The first video was an older one that Ruby had taken while she was pregnant with her youngest child, E. And what she's doing in this video is cutting the gender reveal cake. Gathered around her are the older 5. E was born in September, so this video, even though it was uploaded in 2015, it was filmed in 2013 when the kids were 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10, roughly. Chad in this video looks pretty disappointed that he's getting yet another sister. R, the one who set off this whole case with his visit to his neighbor's house, was a toddler in this video. He's sitting on the counter next to the cake while the older children are around the table. His face is blurred, but you can see his little bare feet in the video. And immediately when I saw his chubby little foot and his chubby little toes, I thought about the images of him walking on that neighbor's porch with smelly, festering, rotting sores around his ankles that were wrapped in saran wrap and duct tape, which he pulled some long, oversized socks over to cover up before he walked to the neighbor's house. Those are the little baby feet that we see in the documentary episode. And just 10 years later, those tiny little feet would be chained up to prevent him from eating, from leaving, from living. So with the birth of Eve in 2013, the Franke family became 8. And with that, they started, or should I say, Ruby started a channel called 8 Passengers. Kevin described it as a powerful metaphor to describe them as a family, stating, "We're all in this vehicle with our family driving down this road called life." From there, the video cuts to Ruby driving their family van as she is saying, "I want our channel to be a ray of sunshine in a world where people just criticize each other and make each other feel bad. And we're here to show that happy families are a reality." I mean, yeah, she showed us, didn't she? But anyway. So then the documentary cuts to a montage of some video uploads and the positive comments that went from a trickle to a flood, with Ruby in the voiceover saying, "I love coming and doing little simple things with my family because it just makes all of my worries go away just for a little bit." Then the camera turned to her face as she says, "Except when they fight." The next voice you begin to hear in the documentary is that of Chad, the second oldest and the one who emerged as the most popular member of the Franke family on their YouTube channel. He was a cute kid with a lot of personality. He was growing up. He was turning into a teenager, and he's this blonde-haired, blue-eyed little heartthrob on YouTube. He talked about how they were pretty well off with all the kids to take care of, the wife, the home, and everything. Kevin was holding it down with his career. Chad said that his dad was a professor with a PhD and described their family life as very simple but fun. He said that his mom's goal with the channel was for things to be natural, nothing scripted, nothing forced. She just wanted to showcase to the world what a happy Mormon family looks like. Maybe to try and change the public perception of the religion. What exactly is the public perception of the Mormon faith? Well, I have my opinions. I'm sure some of you out there have yours. Some of you may even be Mormon. But I found an article on a website called pewresearch.org where 2,000 people were surveyed and they were asked to describe the Mormon religion in one word. The top answer was cult, followed by family, family values, different, polygamy, bigamy, good people, strict, restrictive, conservative, dedicated, Christian, confused, devout, devoted, faithful, strange, honest, interesting, multiple marriages, multiple wives, okay, friendly, misguided, Utah, false, crazy, odd, and religion. 2,000 people, and that's the list that they came up with. It's not that great of a look for the religion as a whole, if you ask me. People seem to have these preconceived notions based on what we see probably in the media and on the internet. And we've come to the conclusions, and I tend to agree with many of these. It's different. I'll go with that. It's a different kind of religion, and nothing against it, I promise. It's just, we have opinions. And we may even be slightly biased because, for me, many of my opinions formed over the years that I've been doing this podcast. And I've mentioned a couple of the cases. I'd never covered Jodi Arias, but I did cover Lori and Chad Daybell. I also covered Stephen Kocher, and I talked about how I believe that he had left this world on his own. He might have taken his own life, and that's what I think happened. I don't know because he's never been found. But he was reaching the age of 30, or he did reach the age of 30. He was still unmarried. And I think the pressure of striving for perfection and the ultimate goal is to become a parent and to raise a family. And that is the only thing, the best and quickest and fastest and the sure way that you're going to bring yourself closer to God is through family and perfection. And I think Stephen couldn't envision that for himself and couldn't handle it anymore and decided to take himself out of it. Anyway, in his interview, Chad stated, "She really was the best mom. Sundays we would go to church. The rest of the week we would have family scripture study at night, the Book of Mormon. We would just say our prayers and go to bed. It was very simple." And dreamers, I feel what he's saying here, and I really believe he believes in what he's saying, but he's still only 20 years old right now, so maybe even 19 when making this documentary. But I can't help but think he's kind of just repeating the mantra, the agenda that his mom was pushing, because I have to be honest with you, this stay-at-home mom situation that turns into her own little enterprise with the 8 passengers YouTube channel, dad with a really, really demanding job, 6 children, all in a span of 10 years. She basically spent the first nearly 15 years of the 21st century pregnant and changing diapers. I just find it hard to believe that life was all rainbows and unicorns, fun and simple, as Chad calls it. To me, dad seems really detached and career oriented, which is great, but I sometimes don't think these working dads with that many kids really get what it's like to be that mom living under that kind of pressure. Add being Mormon to the mix and working to always be perfect. The facade was bound to start cracking. And I'm not making excuses for Ruby, but this is what women born into this faith seem to be raised to do. They're taught from the very beginning that the goal is being a wife, having a litter of kids, and making sure life, family, and home are kept at an impossibly unrealistic level of perfection. And then, only then, are you worthy. Only then are you truly doing God's work. The simple and fun moments were the only ones being shared to social media. Meanwhile, behind the cameras, when the lights were off and the doors were closed, Ruby Franke was inching closer and closer to her breaking point. And I have to say, Andrea Yates, anyone? They weren't Mormon. They were evangelical Christians, but all the same, religion guided their ideas on marriage and family, evolving around having as many children as possible. And all the while, Andrea Yates was falling apart. And it's not something she hid. Her husband was very well aware of his wife's diagnoses. During her teen years, Andrea Yates was bulimic, depressed, and suicidal. After having kids, she had a nervous breakdown followed by 2 suicide attempts, 2 stays in mental health institutions, and culminated into a diagnosis of postpartum psychosis and eventually schizophrenia. She was urged by mental health professionals to not have any more children. By the end of Andrea's second commitment to the mental health facility, she already had 4 children, but ended up getting pregnant about a month and a half after she was discharged for the last time. And after giving birth to that child, she stopped her medications. She engaged in acts of self-harm. She was frantically reading the Bible, and she stopped feeding the newborn. Andrea fell apart to the point that she became incapacitated. After being discharged a couple of weeks later, she slipped back into a catatonic state, and then she proceeded to drown all 5 of her children in the bathtub. I only have 1 kid, so I can't really say that I can truly understand what that's like, having 5 or 6 kids. I've been a preschool teacher and I've been a nanny to up to as many 5 kids at the same time, all under the age of 5. Andrea Yates's kids ranged in age from 9 months to 7 years. So I feel like I have kind of a surface level idea of what having 5 kids so close in age is like. But I didn't give birth to them or had to be around them 24/7. So really there's no comparison. But it is overwhelming. We all know that. And every once in a while, you get someone like Andrea Yates or David and Elizabeth Turpin, Lori Vallow, and here Ruby Franke. You don't know what kind of damage or trauma someone has experienced, and it formed a part of who they were to become as an adult and as parents. You don't know what it's like being stuck in a house with that many children without very much support around them, you know? Andrea Yates was a ticking time bomb. So was Lori, and she said as much. If you watch that video footage of Lori Vallow in that Mrs. Texas beauty pageant that she entered, she called herself a ticking time bomb. She foresaw her future because eventually she did explode. And so was Ruby. It's just Ruby decided to show the world the side of herself that she wanted the world to see. A side that really didn't exist organically. It was a side that she forced, she manufactured for the likes and the views. And when the cameras were off, Ruby was able to degenerate back down to who she really was. The documentary then cuts to one of the children's baptism with the white coveralls and everything. And from there, it cuts to the Franke's eldest daughter and eldest of them all, Sherry. And she talked about her initial excitement about making videos for 8 passengers. The beginning featured Sherry and Chad the most, since they were the 2 oldest and seemed to be the most interested in being actively involved in creating content for their channel. Chad said that he and Sherry were best friends, so it came pretty naturally to them to have fun and act silly for their mom whenever she came around with the camera. However, Chad did say this: "It felt like every video we posted that this is the perfect family, but they only saw what we wanted to show them." The next clip is kind of a hectic moment in the kitchen. It looks like they're getting ready for sports. Ruby is filming. She turns the camera on herself and says, "This is heaven on earth for me. This is heaven. Like, life doesn't get any better than this. It just doesn't. I live for being in the kitchen with my kids and good food." Ironic, right? She then cuts to a family prayer as Kevin says in the voiceover, "We filmed everything and I was so uncomfortable with it." And yeah, some of the clips of him are shown and he does really appear to be uncomfortable with having to walk in the door every day from a long day at work to a house full of kids yelling, playing, and clamoring for him while Ruby shoves her camera in his face. I mean, it kind of sort of gives you a little bit of like Shanann and Chris Watts type vibes, you know, when they were filming, and how awkward it was with Shanann always being real happy and jovial and talking into the camera, and Chris is just kind of lingering in the background, looking incredibly uncomfortable with everything. Same thing here. Well, similar anyway. Of this moment, Kevin says, "When I came in the door, wherever Ruby was, the camera was." It then cuts to Ruby and Kevin sitting next to each other, talking into the camera about what viewers are asking to see. They want to see the family sing Christmas songs and whatnot, and she's trying to engage Kevin in this conversation for her content, and he's really just sitting there in silence. Ruby tells him that she's trying to get him to talk, and he just apologizes and says he's listening to her. He likes to hear her talk. And she just shakes her head, looking kind of exasperated as she says, "I'm cutting all of this out, like, help me out here." Kevin was quiet for another moment. Ruby falls into dead silence as she stares blankly into the camera, waiting for him to say something, anything. But all he can muster is, "I don't know where you want me to come in." Ruby stays silent, still turned away from him, facing the camera, rolling her eyes until he finally says, "Okay, start over again." In the documentary, Kevin says, "All of a sudden, it wasn't enough to just interact with her. I had to interact with the camera." She would pull it out and say, "Kevin, this camera is millions of people watching us." She really wanted me to be the perfect husband, the even-keeled but strong patriarch of the family. But I wasn't. I am a nerd through and through. I was very insecure with who I was, and I was willing to change to be somebody that somebody else would appreciate and love. And then Kevin goes on to talk about the evolution of their relationship, how he met Ruby in August of 2000. And make no mistake, Ruby was a beautiful young woman, and she is still beautiful. She was, at least the last time I saw her. I'm pretty sure being in jail isn't doing her any favors, but anyway. In August of 2000, Ruby was 17. Kevin said that she was actively dating him and about 4 or 5 other young men. I mean, this really has been a focal point for people in these cases involving Mormons. The rules about premarital sex are pretty strict, so there feels like this urgency with some, not all, but some, this social pressure to get married and to start having a family so they can just get over that premarital sex roadblock. That's the goal, and the church facilitates this, you know. They have wards that they join, and they just kind of work on matchmaking. So anyway, in the documentary, Kevin talked about meeting Ruby, and she was being courted by him and a handful of other men, and Kevin said, "And so I decided to play dirty. Inside of her closet, she had this big table." And when he says table, dreamers, he means like a chart, like hanging on the wall. All of the rows were vertical, were all the attributes in a guy that she was looking for. She had physical attributes like athletic. She had a ton of attributes that were related to our religion and our faith. And then along the top, all of the columns were boys. My name was on there. I had a column. So I'm just furiously taking notes, and I went home and I studied hard. I studied that stuff harder than I did my schooling, I think. We were engaged by October of 2000, and we were married by December 28, 2000. You can hear the documentarian say, "It's quite quick." And Kevin says, "Getting married was the ultimate symbol that somebody else was willing to commit their eternity to me. And once I had it, I was willing to do anything to keep it." And we're going to find out that Kevin held his wife in higher esteem than himself and all of his children put together. And that's probably where his problems started with all this, is that whatever Ruby wanted, he was going to support. It didn't matter how terrible it was. He was always going to be on her side. And that's where many of you who commented on my social media post about him said that, yeah, it's unforgivable. You just don't do this to your kids. You don't put your wife ahead of their health and safety and security, you know? The documentary then cuts to July of 2015, going on 7 months since Ruby premiered 8 Passengers. And the first video went viral at this time, 7 months in. It was a video of number 6, about 2-year-old baby E. She's scaling her own crib and getting out. And this is when they start to gain a little bit of recognizability around town. That video of her crawling out of her crib, just everyone was like, oh my God, that's so cute. Sherry talks about how she kind of enjoyed this little spattering of notoriety. There's a video of them driving down the street with someone next to them recognizing who they were. And that was also the moment that they began to monetize as well. The documentarian asked how much the first paycheck that hit the bank account was. Kevin said $85, but it felt amazing. After that, he was sold. He was 100% on board with 8 passengers and whichever direction Ruby was going to take that. And not only that, it made him want it just as much as Ruby wanted it. Imagine that, dreamers. This guy, husband, father of 6, is an engineer. He has an amazing, prestigious career, holding it down for all 8 of them on his own and living the good life, loves and adores his wife, worships the ground she walks on. His life is perfect. At least that's what we think, or that's what they want people to think. And the very first $85 they made on 8 passengers is what sent him into the next level of wanting this, really, really wanting this. Kevin says in the documentary, 8 Passengers LLC was born. The documentary cuts back to Sherry and she says, the kids were all employees, is how we were referred to, was like employees, and Ruby was the CEO. By the way, dreamers, Sherry does refer to her parents by their first names. Doesn't call them mom and dad. She calls them Ruby and Kevin. At the time the story broke, Sherry had been pretty much, what's it called? Oh, disowned. The word was like escaping me. She was estranged from the family because they had basically disowned her and they cut off her car insurance. You'll find out everything as we get through these 3 episodes of this miniseries. From there, the documentary goes into how the family became internet famous, being recognized in public, having meet and greets, signing autographs. It then cuts to a video where Ruby is in her car. She's out running errands when she sees that she has reached 1 million subscribers on YouTube. She says, it's just so fitting to hit 1 million while I'm like trying to squeeze in all of these little things that I am doing to serve my family. Like my big thing has always been mothers are powerful, and it's not the big things that moms do that make them powerful. Power comes in the little things. She gets emotional and she thanks her viewers. From there, the documentary gets into who started to emerge as the most popular of the 8 passengers. And they began to notice that if Chad and Sherry were in the ones featured in the video thumbnail, they got a lot more views than if it were just Ruby or any of the younger children. By 2017, Chad was becoming a teenager and girls across the town started crushing on him. And so there was that driving force behind Ruby's numbers. And because of Chad's popularity, the majority of their viewers were teenage girls. Of course, Chad is a little bit on the cocky side about it in the documentary, but, more power to him, like whatever. But Kevin, he's seeing in his son, and he admits this in the documentary, what he wished he could have been when he was getting out of middle school and going into high school. Remember, Kevin described himself as a nerd. Chad here, he's such a Chad. It's an appropriate name for him, actually, now that I think about it. This boy, he is cute and he's athletic. He's a little ladies' man. And in the documentary, Kevin says, he was everything I wished I was when I was a kid. Confident, handsome, great at sports, the heartthrob and the comedic relief. And that's important. And Ruby knew that, and she exploited it. The documentarian asked, did you exploit it? And Kevin replied, absolutely I did. It then cuts to a video that Ruby took of Chad holding a wad of cash as she says, let's see if we could show how thick this wad of cash is. Then Chad totally hams it up for the camera. and he does this goofy smile and raises a people's eyebrow. It's really cocky, to be honest. And now that I really think about it, this is actually kind of inappropriate to me as well. I don't know. I'm just not one who thinks it's a good idea for YouTubers or celebrities even to be showing off their wealth like this on social media, but even more so to encourage children to do it. I find it kind of disturbing. But of this, Kevin said on the documentary, all of that money, all of that payment came for one reason and one reason only: my kids. Next, it cuts to more video footage taken by Ruby of 3 out of the 6 kids standing side by side holding fans of money. It looks like Sherry on the left is holding a fan of $100 bills. Chad is in the middle with $20 bills. And on the right is one of the middle sisters, probably A, since she's the third eldest. And these appear to be the 3 eldest of the 6. A is holding a fan of $10 bills. And you can hear Ruby in the background instructing them what to do. And she says, smile, now look at it, like, look at the money. And in the voiceover, you hear Kevin talk about how the income began to increase exponentially with each passing month. And they showed close-up of what appears to be the transaction history of the Franke bank account, with periodic deposits coming from YouTube LLC, as Kevin mentions, that at their peak, they were bringing in about $100,000 a month. We then cut back to Sherry's interview as the documentarian asks her, so going back, so you all 6 kids were employees? Sherry replied, yes. He asked, and how old was the youngest employee? And she said, probably like 4 or 5. It then cuts back to Kevin with him being asked, did you have any misgivings about that? Because a lot of them, they were young. Kevin replied, not at the time. I was raised on the idea of the cosmic vending machine. It's this idea that I can bargain with or do business with God. We've believed that we were sharing goodness, Christianity, with the whole world, and in return, God was blessing us. We then cut to Ruby sitting in her home on the couch talking into her camera, saying, I have been overwhelmed by how many blessings that we've received in our family. So many, not just today. Kevin's voiceover cuts in and says, but for Ruby, it's never been about the money. By this point, Ruby was effectively America's mom. And then the documentary shows a spattering of the Franke kids coming into Ruby's bedroom on Mother's Day with a strawberry and whipped cream covered waffle. And she's in bed alone. And she gets up, and to me, she looks like she was fully awake. I wake up every single morning in a daze for about a minute or two. Feel around the bed or the nightstand for my phone. Check the time. And then I decide what I'm going to do next and what version of myself is about to emerge. And then I lay there some more until the rest of me catches up, and I eventually peel myself up off the bed. This, it's so bright in this bedroom. She has one of those really fluffy, white, what looks like maybe a down alternative blanket or comforter. But it certainly doesn't look like the condition my blankets are in the morning after 2 people slept in it all night, rolling side to side, flipping pillows to find the cold side, half of them ending up on the floor, blankets in a huge wad in the middle of the bed by the morning. No. Her comforter is perfectly tucked in at the foot of the bed, tucked in neatly between the mattress and what looks like a wrought iron footboard. So yeah, everything is still tucked in. The only part of the comforter that's slightly disturbed is where it was made to look like Kevin folded over the corner ever so slightly to make it look like he got out of bed while Ruby was still sleeping. Her pillows look mostly perfectly fluffed. Hers is even more so than Kevin's, actually. Even though she supposedly was still asleep on it, their pillows are perfectly in place too. And when the kids walk in, there's no first thing in the morning waking up out of a deep sleep confusion here. She was full on ready for them to walk in, and they yelled, "Happy Mother's Day," and she screams with delight, "Come here!" And one of the kids jumps on top of her in the bed. It's like a super wholesome Hallmark moment that you'd probably find in a scene just like in a Hallmark movie, since it looks so staged and everybody's got their acting chops going this morning. And just the fact that a simple Mother's Day moment can't even be filmed organically even further turns me off to these types of channels and TV shows, to be honest. I don't know. There's nothing fun about these types of videos to me at all. Not interested in the least. But anyway, as I said, Kevin was already out of the bed. You can hear him in the background of the Mother's Day surprise video asking his kids if they're ready. And he opens up the bedroom door to quote unquote wake Ruby up with Mother's Day breakfast in bed. It's also so bright in that room. And really, to be honest with you, a mom as controlling as Ruby, honestly, I don't see her sleeping through her husband being up and somewhere else around the house and the kids toiling around in the kitchen, and for her to be dead asleep through it all. This is a very, very controlling woman, and she's got her antennas up at all times, eyes and ears all over that house. It's exactly what Kevin had been saying in his interview. Ruby wasn't getting the kinds of praise and adoration that she felt like she deserved from the world, and this was her way of celebrating herself and making her husband and her kids celebrate her on film so she could show everyone else that it's not only she who thinks that she's the best mom in the world. Everyone thinks that she is the best mom in the world, and she has video to prove it. Ruby reads the cards that the kids made her, as Kevin's voiceover says, and of all the moms that YouTube could showcase and highlight and put on a pedestal on Mother's Day, there was Ruby. She wanted that more than anything, and it was effective. From there, the documentary shows a variety of comments from adoring fans, some of them expressing how much of an inspiration Ruby and her family was to them, how they've strengthened some of their relationships with God, things that Ruby had been wanting to be lauded and praised for doing a sometimes thankless job that millions of women across the country and around the world do every single day, parent. And to me, that would be a huge red flag from the outside looking in, knowing what the day-to-day grind is like with a busy family and kids. We know deep in our hearts that reality is nothing like what Ruby was showcasing to the world on 8 Passengers. I could absolutely not relate to anything Ruby was doing in her videos, and nothing about watching perfect, wealthy, religious families living their best lives is fun or enjoyable to me. And not just because of how Ruby's story came to a disastrous end. I mean, she's the exception, at least I hope she is. But even if there was no controversy or nefarious things going on off camera, I still wouldn't be interested in watching. And really, the only reason I'm even interested is because of the controversy and nefarious things. That's what I look for on YouTube. And if I'm super interested, you'll probably hear about it on my show. Watching and listening to some of her videos with her kids, the only way to describe my level of cringe is to say, imagine what it would be like if the sound of fingernails scratching down a chalkboard, all of a sudden that sound came to life and invaded your ear holes and burrowed into your brain. That's the worst part about this episode, of having to sit through clips of 8 Passengers knowing what we know now. And then the video cuts to Ruby filming an interaction with an 8 Passengers fan where he shares that he's converting to Mormonism as a direct result of Ruby and her YouTube channel. Ruby then looks into the camera with pride and then hugs this young man. And while this is going on in the documentary, Kevin's voiceover says, she would confide to me that she was meant to be some sort of instrument in the hand of God, that she was meant for something bigger than herself. The documentary then cuts to someone pounding a house for sale sign on a stake into the ground. The Frankies were putting their home in Springville on the market, and from there, it cuts to the family gathered in front of the camera, collectively yelling, "We sold the house!" They're filled with excitement as they yell it, and the moment Ruby got what she wanted out of them on video recording, she immediately goes back into business mode, talking about what image she's going to use for the thumbnail when she uploads. The voiceover in the documentary is coming from, this time, a woman named Lisa McLean. Her and her husband Matthew were neighbors of the Frankies, and Lisa says, "The Frankies, they only lived in the next neighborhood over. They did kind of have a negative reputation for filming and not asking." And then it cuts to Ruby as she says, "Today is moving day. I can't believe the day has come where we are leaving." It's worth noting that Ruby does not really look like she's been hard at work packing up for the move. She's got full makeup on, false eyelashes, eyebrows on point, and a pair of large, dangly, teardrop-shaped hoop earrings. I mean, it's been about 5 years since I last moved, and I'm fairly certain I was not looking like I was about to go to brunch with the girls. We then see another set of neighbors, Jared and Sydney Condi. As Sydney says, YouTube wasn't banned in our house, but we really didn't encourage our children to watch it. So we really didn't know of them until I heard from my niece. And she messaged me and she was like, "I think these guys are moving into your neighborhood." So then I think we were like, okay, who are they? It then cuts to Ruby unlocking the door of their new home. She had set the camera up, propped it up somewhere low to the ground, and filmed herself opening the door. She then turns around and talks directly into the camera and tells viewers, "This is where our grandkids are going to come visit Grandma. Kevin's going to be a grandpa. Like, this is our grandma home. You ready?" Then she picks up the camera and goes inside. Going back to the neighbor Lisa, she says, "As a couple, we both connected with Kevin, and talking with him, we never had any beef with Kevin ever. It was always with Ruby and the channel." And oh my God, if you're wanting to see some next level cringe, this documentary has it. It cuts to Ruby walking with her camera, and it's showing from her perspective, panning up from a shot of her feet as she simultaneously starts singing the Mr. Rogers Neighborhood theme song. And I was watching this as I was writing my notes, and I literally wanted to stab my eardrums. She turns the camera towards herself as she starts asking, "Would you be my neighbor?" Oh God, it's so stupid. And Lisa's voiceover comes back on and says, "Anytime they went for a walk, Ruby would wear the bright dress, bright lipstick, filming, and all of our homes were in the background, and we're just a private community." We then hear from the second neighbor again, Sydney. The wives dreamers in this are doing all of the talking throughout, which seems to be a running theme here with these particular neighbors. The wives seem to be the mouthpiece of the family, and the husbands kind of sort of just float around in the background. Though we do hear from Sydney's husband, I think once, and that's it. I don't think we hear from any of the others. Sydney said, "To be honest, Ruby wasn't the most friendly person." Her husband, Jared, he then says, "I don't think she really ever had a major conversation with me the whole time that she was here." Then Sydney says, "She wasn't hosting parties. She wasn't trying to have people come over for brunch or a ladies' day. She kind of, I think, kept to herself." Then it cuts to Ruby walking with Lisa in the voiceover saying, "She just seemed very busy. So I think for a lot of us, she just sort of got a reputation that her channel was more important than relationships with people." Kevin's voiceover comes in and he says, "We were just kind of lost in the fun of it, but we did see changes in the kids accumulating." After Kevin said that, the documentary cuts to the family on an outing somewhere. The camera is panning across the children as they stand around when Kevin says, "And Chad are being terrible." But the camera stops on Ruby as she says, "You can use their faces as B-roll." B-roll is secondary video footage, some clips of which might be used, edited into the A-roll to help support, add, or bolster the video in post-production. That's what it said when I Googled it. So on this video clip they're showing, we hear Kevin's voice as he tells the kids, the whole reason we are here is because of our job, and you guys are acting like this is stupid. In his interview, Kevin said, the kids started to complain about everything, like, I'm bored, we don't want to film, we're so tired of doing this. It really began to concern Ruby a lot. She would describe it as they were losing their light. And wow, that sounds a little Lori Vallow-ish, doesn't it? Light beings, dark beings, just wow. So when your kids are acting up and not listening or being bad, or how about this, they're being kids, they're leaning in on their dark sides all of a sudden? Yeah, we've heard that before, and we know how that story ended too, right? Anyhow, the documentary then cuts to Ruby driving and filming with the camera pointed directly at Chad, who's in the passenger seat, as Ruby shouts, do you know that this is what we do? And everyone gets $10 for every video that they help with. Do you want $10? Nobody answered. It cuts to Sherry's interview as she says, our entire schedule evolved around YouTube. And I think that's where I started to have issues. It then shows footage of the children doing chores around the house as Sherry in her voiceover describes how Ruby put really super bright white light bulbs all around the house, giving the place a feel of being more like a set or a studio than a home. It then cuts to the Franke's next door neighbors, Kristen and Grant Colliard, as Kristen says, my heart sunk pretty fast because I started watching some of the videos and I was, honestly, appalled is the word I have. Now, her husband tried to cut in, but she stopped him and continued. She said that she was appalled of sharing so much personal information about your kids. It then shows screenshots of some of Ruby's uploads and their titles. Bra shopping with brothers. Officially started puberty. First time shaving. Ski school, wet my pants were a few examples. Chad's voiceover comes on as he says, that was when I just wanted to be with my friends. I didn't want anything to do with YouTube. It cuts to a clip of Ruby filming Chad shirtless in the bathroom, putting on a t-shirt. When he notices he's being filmed in the mirror, he turns around and slams the door shut. As his voice continues in the voiceover, it bugged the crap out of me. I hated it. And there was a time, maybe even a year or more, where I truly hated her. We then see a clip of Chad sitting with his youngest sister. He's outside someplace in nature, just sitting there, staring down a little bit, not at all engaged with his mom's filming. You can hear Ruby say, smile. He doesn't move or respond until she says, Chad, look at me. He quickly turns towards the camera and flashes a half-hearted smile. And with this fake smile frozen on his face, Chad says through his teeth, I hate smiling at lenses. Chad then says in his interview, but when it came to brand deals and sponsorships, that's what really put me on edge because it felt like a script. I felt like I was being controlled. So dreamers, what we have here is the beginning of Chad acting out and rebelling. We then see Ruby filming a spot for a paid sponsorship. She's saying whatever lines they provided her with. The camera is on her as she is sitting on the sofa and she says, do you think your teen's mental health is more important than schooling? She then turns the camera to Chad, seated to her right. He is slouched next to her and he looks as if he's daydreaming or drifted off into deep thoughts or something, as Ruby says to him, do you know where I sit with that? He then slightly shrugged his shoulder and stayed silent. Ruby then says, Chad, are you going to be willing to help me out or not? You seem really distant. We then hear Chad's voiceover as he says, I purposely said the wrong lines. I purposely tried to make my mom as pissed as she possibly could. I made things hard for her, and I don't know why. I think it just goes back to I really didn't like being told what to do. I wasn't even doing anything bad. I just wouldn't listen to adults, especially my teachers. And dreamers, were seeing the inklings of the first red flags to appear surrounding the Franke family and 8 passengers, because these types of things aren't supposed to happen to perfect families. And let's see what Ruby had to say in her car next as the documentary cuts to this thing that she filmed. She's alone in the driver's seat. She's staring out the window before she turns to the camera, and she sighs deeply. And Ruby is clearly not her usual America's mom self, as she says, "In May, Chad was expelled from school, and I didn't know what the answer was. I didn't know where he was going to go, and after several discussions and conversations with him, we knew that it would be the most helpful if he had some support." Then we hear Chad say in his voiceover, "Once I started getting suspended, my parents thought it would be a great idea if I started getting into therapy. I think she wanted somebody that really put the hammer down." Next, we hear Kevin, and he says Ruby went to Paige. Paige Hannah was a friend of Ruby's, and Paige effectively said, "I know the perfect person." We see Paige on camera as Kevin's voiceover about her is playing. It then cuts to an internet search bar where we see the name Jodi Hildebrandt typed in. I typed Jodi Hildebrandt website into my search bar, and her website is still up and active, but there is a drop-down menu tab marked Child Abuse Arrest next to the Home tab, and the next tabs are License on Probation, Reviews, LDS, and Contact. This is what Jodi's website says. Jodi Hildebrandt is an author, life coach, and the founder and creator of the Connections Classroom based in Orem, Utah. The curriculum is strongly based on her 5 years of experience working at Cirque Lodge, a drug rehabilitation center that focuses on treating addiction. After leaving Cirque Lodge, Jodi designed and created the Connections 101 course, which is a basis for teaching throughout the various counseling programs that are offered through her Connections classroom. The core teachings of Connections is that for a person to achieve a true connection with another human being, they must not be in distortion. Distortion is a broad term defined by Jodi. By taking her course, people learn that they are in distortion by the following: being addicted to things such as your spouse, work, shopping, electronic games, sleep, social media, driving, receiving compliments, exercising, eating, drugs, alcohol, sex, pornography, hobbies, entertainment. The things that you can become addicted to are endless. Living in shame, living in denial, knowing that you are not enough, being codependent in your relationships, living in lust, being sexually attracted to your spouse, and controlling and manipulating others. Jodi asserts everyone is in distortion and all experience the above, but she can help you overcome distortion and live in truth. Jodi teaches that 3 core principles must be developed in order to truly connect with anyone to avoid distortion. If you or others do not practice these principles, they are considered in distortion. Boundaries need to be set to distance yourself from these individuals so you are not drawn into distortion with them. These core principles of Connections are being impeccably honest, rigorous personal responsibility, and humility. So, dreamers, there are a few more paragraphs about how Jodi applies those principles of hers, but the final paragraph is the last part of this website's homepage, and I will share it with you because since we know what Jodi Hildebrandt was and is really all about, I'll skip all of her hippy-dippy baloney and get straight to it. Jodi often remarks that and relishes the fact that people either love me or hate me for what I'm teaching. Students she has convinced that her way of connecting relationships is the one true way love her. The people that her teachings are being applied to usually hate her, and they are told they are emotionally and verbally abusive, an addict of all kinds of things, codependent in the relationship, in distortion, not humble, not impeccably honest, and not rigorously responsible. Their spouse, friend, or associate has changed over the course of a few weeks, and now they are the main problem in the relationship. Unless they change and learn these new skills from Jodi, they will be cut off in the relationship. New physical and emotional boundaries will be put in place anytime they or their support group deem you are in distortion. Now, dreamers, I don't know if that was what was up on her website when Jodi was actively running her Connections classroom, or if it was all changed to something a little more brutally honest and what she's really about, because, this is basically what she was advertising, and it seems like Jodi's whole way about running her Connections is when the person seeking help from her actually experiences changes in their life and in their way of thinking, and the other person in the relationship does not take any of Jodi's classes, then they're going to be labeled the problem in the relationship. And furthermore, unless they actually change, they're going to be cut off in the relationship, which kind of sounds like the opposite of the name of this course, Connections, and the opposite of what a couple might be seeking to better their relationship and what they need to make it better. If you're going to marriage counseling, it doesn't seem at all helpful or useful to tell these couples that the only one willing to make changes and advance is going to change for the better. And if the other person does not learn these new skills from Jodi, and that's exactly what it says on her homepage, then they'll be cut off in the relationship. Like I said, I don't know if the homepage has been changed to reflect the reality of what Jodi was actually doing, or if this is what she actually had up prior to her being arrested on the abuse charges. But anyway, getting back to the documentary, it was Ruby's own friend, Paige, that turned her on to the services of Jodi Hildebrandt. The documentary then cuts to either a YouTube channel or a podcast or both that Jodi hosted called Mental Fitness with Jodi Hildebrandt. She had apparently been somewhat of a prominent therapist, so to speak, in the community, and I put therapist in quotes because there was some question as to her status related to her ability to practice at the time that we started to hear about this story emerge out of Utah. Of Jodi, Paige stated in the documentary in her interview, when Jodi was teaching, she could just cut straight to the chase, so I admired her, and I did look to her as a guru. And I really found myself putting her on a pedestal of, if I'm going to learn from somebody, she's a great person to learn from. She did come across very knowledgeable, and she referenced her history. She was at a very prestigious drug rehab facility with a lot of prominent people, and I bought it. Brandon Patrick, the therapist that I mentioned earlier in this episode, he was the one who talked about Happy Valley and what the culture of the community was like, such as striving for perfection, etc., etc. He spoke of Jodi in his interview, stating, "In 2010, I finally got fully licensed as a therapist. One of the biggest practices was Jodi Hildebrandt's practice in Utah County, and she invited me to come shadow her. At first, I was actually amazed. I thought, wow, look at what she's doing. This is incredible. She's courageous, she's powerful, and I was a little bit convinced that she had it figured out. She can speak with authority really well. When they're looking for guidance and they're looking for help, and she's coming across as, I know how to do this, and I will tell you directly what you need to do, people respond to that. Hallelujah, somebody who's going to call me on my stuff and help me move toward what I desire in my life." The documentary then cuts to a video of Jodi saying, quote, You're going to learn how to parent your children in a way that does not invite them to live in distortion. So I suppose what we saw on that Ring doorbell that summer day back in August of 2023, an injured, starved, and thirsty 12-year-old seeking help, I guess that's Jodi's parenting style. We then hear from Kevin again as he said Ruby fell in love with everything that she was hearing and seeing. So about a month after was the first meeting between Jodi and Chad. Of this, Chad stated, I remember my mom telling me that morning, hey, it's going to be your first kind of session with her. And I remember looking forward to that call just to kind of like get rid of her. I'll just put on a happy face, I smile, and this will all go away eventually. And so I go into my parents' room. They open up the laptops. I'm kind of in the middle. My parents are sitting on either side of me. And the first thing Jodi said was, you know, Chad, it's really good to see you. Are you ready to start living an honest and responsible and humble lifestyle? And I said, absolutely, yeah, let's get this started, you know. I'm so ready to live a responsible life. And the first thing she said was, you're lying, Chad. And then I went silent. This random person I've never met before just said, you're lying to me, Chad. And I just remember thinking like, well, yeah, I'm lying to you, but you just said it. And I remember I looked at my mom and my mom looked at my dad and my mom kind of smiled a little bit like she smirked. She really kind of just read through me, and that really excited my mom. That there was finally someone out there who isn't going to take my bullcrap anymore. So she was hooked onto her from that moment on. Of this, Kevin said, Chad just scowled at her. And after that first call, Jodi's like, he needs an outcome. He needs an outcome for the way that he showed up in that meeting. He's running circles around you and your wife. Chad then said, to get me back in line, they needed to take everything away from me. All electronics, which meant my phone, the Xbox, no access to sports. They even sent me to a wilderness camp. And dreamers, Chad's parents vlogged about this at the time that they dropped him off at that camp in Arizona. It's a place called the Anasazi Foundation Wilderness Therapy Program. I think I'm going to expand on that a little bit more because I found a few videos on YouTube that made some compilations of some of the most troubling videos that were uploaded to their 8 Passengers channel. And this particular video of dropping Chad off, they made from the hotel that Kevin and Ruby were staying at when they traveled with him to bring him to that camp. I did look up the camp just to see what the reviews were like, and generally people said that their experience was pretty good. So it's not one of these terrible experiences that we hear some kids having when they're sent off to these sort of camps. I didn't look that deeply into it. There's probably some horror stories. I guess it just depends on, everyone's experience is different. So one person might have a glowing opinion, another person not so much. And the camp itself, possibly even because it's so deeply ingrained within the Mormon religion as well, it seems to be integrated into this therapy camp. It seems to be something popular amongst people who are having difficulties with their children and also happen to be LDS. I mean, it could be the powers that be scrubbed some of the worst stories from the internet. I don't know. I'm very skeptical of these types of things though. However, that's another story for another day, for another episode, possibly even a different podcast, because I really don't talk too much about those types of experiences, like teenagers getting sent off to these weird boot camps that get abused and mistreated and all that stuff. So I guess it's one of those things that I really hold parents responsible for. After all, they're the ones that bring their kids there and make them go. So it's up to them to do their research and listen to their children if there's something troubling going on. I know that sounds like a simple answer, but As a parent, I would be very, very skeptical of any place that I considered sending my child to, and I would look into it very deeply, and I would want to know everything about it before I even entrusted them with trying to help or provide therapy and counseling for my child. But anyway, I'm sorry if I'm rambling on about that. I just didn't really have anything in depth to say about the camp. Some of you might have been curious about it. Some of you may have known about it, heard about it, possibly even been there. If you want to reach out to me and share, please do. My emails and all my contact information's in the show notes. Getting back to the documentary, Chad next said, "My mom was trying to do everything she could to fix me, but I never felt she was doing it for me. It was like she was doing it for herself. It got to the point where she gave me an option to sleep like in the living room, or she gave me the option to go down into the basement and sleep on our little beanbag. And I slept on that beanbag every night for about 7 months, and that was my bedroom, the basement. My mom, at some point, she kind of got teary-eyed and she said, 'Chad, this is your last chance. Jodi and I have found a military camp in Virginia, and we are just waiting for one more time of you acting up, and if that happens, we're going to send you there until you're 18. And that scared the hell out of me. That terrified me. I really shaped up. I just accepted it very quickly. I don't know. I think I really sensed something in my mom that realized she's not going to let Jodi go. This is how it's going to be. This is how it's going to be from now on. And I just decided to start listening. It went from weekly calls with Jodi to 2 meetings a week. She was very kind and considerate, very understanding. We had good laughs in our phone calls. And that's where I tell people, like, at first, working with her really wasn't that bad. Her main focus was for me to have a more spiritual lifestyle. So then the documentary cuts to one of Ruby's 8-passenger uploads where she's saying, quote, "Jodi helped Chad understand that his happiness isn't dependent on him getting a phone or mom saying yes to things. We have searched high and low for a therapist to help Chad see that, and Jodi is 1 in a million. I say that quite literally. Literally. I think she says it like that. I say that quite literally. She is 1 in a million. And the happiness has been in our house. You can feel it. I know that you have felt the change in our home too. I know it." Kevin then said, "Behind the scenes, Chad was working really hard. He was not complaining anymore about his sessions with Jodi. I remember just thinking, like, he's fixed. He's polite. He's grateful. This is great." Ruby and I both were like, "Okay, I think you're ready to have the privilege back of a bedroom." That was the spark that blew the powder keg. So yes, dreamers, now we're about to get into the beginning of the end. The video that tipped that first domino. All it took was one misguided, ill-conceived video upload to their 8 Passengers channel to topple that empire that they had built. Instead of telling you about it, let me go ahead and play the audio for you. You'll find the link in the show notes. This is the upload that Kevin referred to as the spark that set off that powder keg.
The last videos that we did on electronics, you guys saw that I took Abby's phone away.
I still don't know how she hasn't gotten that bag.
Abby, so in our house, when we take something away, it's because they have shown that they are not responsible enough to manage it. And so we don't just turn around and give it back as soon as they start acting good.
It has to be consistent.
It has to be consistent over a minimum of 6 months, and that's showing up consistent in every aspect of their life.
That's a new rule.
That's a new rule.
Oh wait, just
a minimum of 6 months.
Have I ever given something back less than 6 months?
I've had my phone
No.
for like a day.
My bedroom was taken away for 7 months, and then you give it back like a couple weeks ago.
I don't think our viewers know that.
You've been sleeping on a beanbag.
I've been sleeping on a beanbag since October, and they gave my room back like 2 weeks ago. Oh, I'll give you the reason why I lost my bedroom. I think so. I think this is the reason. At least this is the reason that's been in my head. It's pretty funny, but now that I look back, I mean, it's pretty depressing.
No, we never told our viewers.
That I woke Russell up at 2 in the morning and told him that we're going to Disneyland and he has to pack. And he got up and made his bed all neatly and then packed all his clothes in a suitcase. And then he walked out the door and I'm like, Russell, he was like, what? And he's all happy. Has his sunglasses on. And I was like, we're not going to Disneyland. And he started crying and hitting me. And then he went back to bed in tears and then...
So that was not the reason you lost your room, but that was...
Well, the other reason is because I pointed a BB gun at his face.
Pointed a BB gun at his face and hung him on the basketball. It's not funny. Basically, Chad...
Oh, like the day I got home, too.
Chad came home from Anasazi and...
Russell was like, I want to try dunking the basketball, and I lifted him up on the rim. And left him there for like solid 3 minutes, and he was just hanging on there.
Do you think it's funny? Because
and then I walk out.
If you think it's funny, then that was 7 months ago. Maybe you need longer without a bedroom.
It was not funny.
Chad showed that he was not able to manage himself sharing a bedroom with Russell.
So when we moved, the bigger room in the basement was automatically his, and I didn't have a room, but we like put one on hold for me.
So a lot of you are like, hey, that's not fair because Chad got the lesser bedroom and Russell got the bigger bedroom. Russell got the big bedroom and Chad got the smaller bedroom. And Russell's bigger bedroom also had a bathroom. But what you guys didn't know was Chad didn't get any room. He didn't get anything. He was sleeping on the floor in the family room. And he just got the bedroom back, and it's because he's shown up consistently without bullying the kids.
You hear the phone call when I called you when he was sneaking in his room, and all he heard was iPad's locked up for the summer. So he told me, Mom's not going to do anything when she gets home. She's only going to lock him up. And so he was expecting that you would come home and be fine about it.
I'm not okay
so I
with it.
think that when he heard about electronics and friends and all that,
Chad hasn't had a flip phone, a smartphone, any kind of phone, and it's been over a year. And I still have no intention of returning a phone. Abby, we took the phone away from Abby in November. And you may never get the phone back.
Probably not.
If I was to go back and redo anything in parenting, it would be not to give the kids a phone. Yeah, so there will be basically no technology over the summer.
And now I have no friends.
You can play with friends.
No, like I don't have friends.
I don't have friends either.
I literally like told my friends I'm not hanging out with them anymore
Because they're
they say some pretty messed up stuff.
I don't even know where they live. They're pretty far away.
So, summer goal, become the best athlete I possibly can.
How do you feel about not having any friends?
Sucks, but I don't feel safe or accepted in any friend groups, so.
That's really vulnerable of you to say that on camera, because you don't have to film that.
No, it's true though, and I've told my friends that as well, so.
What I have seen, look, when you make these choices with your family to take things away, as a parent, you really do want them to have these things. And it's been so difficult to take a phone away, to take a bedroom away, to take iPads away, to take access away. Like, it hurts me just as much as it hurts my kids. Like feeling bad. Like, I feel bad.
So then what do you mean you have no intention of giving us them back?
I have no intention of giving you a phone back.
Yeah, like, it doesn't seem you like feel bad about that.
Oh, I guess what I'm saying is initially I feel like, oh, you're showing up responsible. It's been 3 weeks and you're doing awesome. And it's like, I want to give the phone back to tell you, I see that you're making, that you're making progress, that you're putting in an effort. And every time I would do that, all it would do is enable you to go back to old behavior. And so it was like, oh, just show up really good for 3 weeks, get your stuff back, and you're back into the old habits. What I'm saying is I don't have a timeline to say, okay, Chad just has 5 more months to go, and then he gets a phone back.
I said specific months, I said consistent.
Yeah, right. And so what I'm saying is I haven't given it much thought. But yeah, sharing with everyone the fact that you don't have a group of friends, that's really hard. I'm sorry that you're in that situation. And I'm proud of you for cutting off with friends who make inappropriate jokes and who are inappropriate. Chad doesn't have a license either.
Or a permit.
That is something I'm willing to talk about.
Especially since, like, I know parents are scared that not to give their kids permits or licenses. And I know you and Dad talked about this, like, a long time ago, because, like, you want me to be safe in a car and, like, drive responsibility, like, and not, like, do donuts or something.
Yeah.
But, like, I would never, not only does that, like, endanger you and everyone else in the car, but damages the car. Wait, can we go back to what you said at the first? You are willing to consider the permit?
That is a place I would be willing to have a thoughtful conversation with you and Dad around.
Can I go?
Thank you, Mom. That would be so awesome.
Okay.
Can I go?
Yeah, you can go.
Thank you.
You can go. Okay, you guys, I need to go have a talk with Russell. The fact that he's not willing to sit with me and be humble and talk is a big demonstration to me that he has some distorted views and that he is in a lot of shame. Oh, there you are. I was just talking about you. Do you want to come sit with me and talk? I'm going to get down on your level. I've noticed that you've been hiding from me, and you are feeling a lot of embarrassment and shame. I don't know. You tell me what you're feeling. Mad?
Because I really won't get anything this summer. I won't be able to go anywhere. No, I don't have any friends. No iPads, no TV, nothing.
Okay, so I hear you. That sounds like a lot to be taken away. That sounds like it's going to be a miserable summer. Can I tell you what I see? Would you be open to hearing what I have to say? I see that yes, the iPads will be taken because you weren't responsible. You were lying and being manipulative with them.
Yeah, but you did start it.
And Eve may have started it. That's very possible. And who's responsible for you being disobedient around the iPads?
Me.
You. Yeah. So it's up to you. If you want to be miserable because you don't get TV or iPad, that is totally up to you. You get to choose boredom and you get to choose to be miserable. What I am seeing, though, is that you're upset with the outcome for being mischievous. And instead of being humble and accepting that there is an outcome for you behaving like that with the iPads, instead you're being selfish. And what I would like to see is that you be humble and say, yeah, you know, I own it. I was mischievous with the iPads. I was sneaking them. I can see where I've broken trust, and I don't want our relationship to be an untrusting relationship. And I love you with all my heart. And that is why I'm trying my best to teach you in the only ways I know how. Okay? I'd love to read you a book. Would you like to go get a book and I'll read to you? Okay, go get a little story and I'll read to you in my bed. That'll be fun. Gosh, you're cute. You are so cute. Okay, go get a book. I'll wait right here for you. All right, you guys. I love you too. Good night.
In that audio that you just listened to, you can hear that Ruby was the one that led the kids into this conversation regarding them losing privileges due to their misbehavior. And she says that in order to earn things back, such as electronics, their cell phones, things of that nature, they have to demonstrate over a period of time that they've changed their behavior, and the minimum amount of time that they are on punishment for or they lose these things for is 6 months. The kids have to show Ruby that they have learned and have changed on a consistent basis for at least that amount of time, 6 months, before they'll even consider lifting restrictions or giving back privileges. The kids kind of laugh and joke that this is a new rule to them, but Ruby challenges them by asking if she's ever given them anything back after less than 6 months. Off camera, you hear one of the girls say that she had her phone taken away for a matter of days, but then Chad brings up how his bedroom was taken away for 7 months and that he had just gotten it back a couple weeks prior to the making of that video. I am pretty sure that Ruby did not expect Chad to bring that up, and I don't think this is a live video. Ruby was a little bit too controlling to go live with her kids. At least that's what it seems. Based on what I saw in the documentary, everything was planned, everything was scripted. Not very much was spontaneous. Maybe it was more so in the beginning, but as Ruby started to hone in on what viewers were interested in seeing, she was trying to recreate those types of things day in and day out, and it gets old. But yeah, all of that is to say is I don't think that she was live when this was made, and I don't know. It could be, but it doesn't seem like that was something that she would be willing to do because her kids were starting to not cooperate very much, like at all. It was becoming a huge issue. But then again, Ruby is pretty tone deaf when it comes to certain things, which is what ultimately led to the mass exodus of her followers after this video was posted. I think most of us, if not all of us, would have been pretty taken aback by this 7-month punishment of losing an entire bedroom. But she put this out there for the world, and the backlash was harsh and swift. Right away after Chad said in that video that he lost his room for 7 months and just got it back a couple weeks before the making of that video, Ruby, sitting next to him, started to laugh. I mean, beaming. Her smile is huge. And she said, "I don't think our viewers know that." So she kind of had some idea that it was something she really didn't want to necessarily broadcast. And of course, I think all of us can understand why, but she did it. The fact that she said, "I don't think our viewers know that," is because she didn't want them to know that. If she wanted them to know, she would have said it. She even understands that that punishment is outrageous. And we know what he did. He said it in the video. He pranked his little brother into thinking that they were taking a road trip to Disneyland and got him all packed up and out the door with, his vacation clothes, his suitcase, his sunglasses, his sunscreen, all at like 3 or 4 in the morning. And he gets out there and there's no trip to Disneyland. That's what Chad did. It was a prank and a joke. And for his troubles, he got sentenced to 7 months in the beanbag. Anyway, like I said, she's tone deaf. I wouldn't have put that out there, but she did it. Ruby posted this video and is probably sitting in her little jail cell right now, regretting it. She's going to regret that for the rest of her life. Off camera, you can hear one of the girls say that he's been sleeping on a beanbag for months. Ruby is still beaming, smiling from ear to ear. She's just overwhelmed with this enthusiasm over this weird, outrageous punishment as Chad continued to talk about it. And he says, I've been sleeping on a beanbag since October. Then they gave me my room back like 2 weeks ago. So he went through October, Halloween, November, Thanksgiving, December, Christmas, New Year's, Valentine's Day, St. Patrick's Day, Easter, maybe. She said 7 months, so 7 months from October takes us to what, May? Yeah, all the way to May, all of winter and all of spring, almost all of spring. That's crazy. That's the craziest punishment ever, except for the physical stuff. But I don't know how people come up with this stuff. I've been watching trial footage of the, what's her name? Shonda Vander Ark. She's that mom out of Michigan who abused her son along with the help of her older son, the older brother of the victim, and abused him to death, basically. She made him do some really, I don't want to say creative, but stuff that you really have to have an evil mind, an evil heart, and like a really dark soul to think up this stuff. It was so ridiculous that I even looked up to see if this woman was Mormon, but I don't see any indication of it being the case. But she had a whole bunch of kids, and she was abusing only one of them, though they probably all suffered some level of abuse. You don't just pick on one. You might pick on one more than the others. But anyway, his name was Timothy Ferguson, and he was 15, and he was murdered in Michigan. He had been returned to her by his own father after she had lost all her parental rights to him because of abuse in the past. But the father was fed up, or that's at least what my understanding was, couldn't handle him anymore. He was special needs. He was on the autism spectrum. His mom said he had all these issues, which is what she kind of used to justify her actions. If you guys are interested in the Shonda Vander Ark case, I'd be happy to cover that too, because she took the stand in her own defense, and it was a shit show. Let me know. Shonda, Shanda, Vander, Vander space Ark. If you haven't heard it, look it up. She is nasty, a nasty woman. And fortunately, she's serving her time. Justice was served. Anyway, I'm sorry I got sidetracked. Ruby, I said, as Chad was talking about the 7 months in the beanbag, Ruby was smiling, thinking that this was just freaking hilarious. Then Chad goes into talking about another one of the kids, their phone being taken away since December. So we're in May. So that's 5 months without their cell phone, which, I mean, it's sort of, it's debatable how you feel about losing the cell phone. It is really a huge privilege. But nowadays, it's kind of like necessary. I used to take care of a kid when I was living in Huntington Beach for a while. Her parents, they sent her to the Orange County School of Arts. I can't remember the exact. It's like this really prestigious school that you have to audition for. But the commute was far, and they were looking for someone to give her a ride to school in the mornings, which round trip took 2 hours to get from Huntington to Anaheim. 2 hours in the morning, and then pick her up after school 2 hours in the afternoon. And I got paid like a flat rate plus gas, to do that. And I did that for a while. I want to tell you guys why I ended up losing that job. It's kind of ridiculous, but it was my own fault. However, if you're interested, let me know, and maybe I'll share that experience in the next episode. What was my point? Oh yeah, there came a time when her parents took away her cell phone, but they would give her like a flip phone that had like no internet, no nothing. So it was kind of sad, and I felt kind of bad because she was a good kid. She got amazing grades. She never ditched school, but she kind of was a little bit, boy crazy, and they were trying to control that. So I understand, but I mean, I felt it was a little bit overbearing. That's just my opinion. I might have done the same thing though, I did have a teenage girl, but she wasn't boy crazy like this girl was. I mean, she was boy crazy, and she would tell me all about it, you know? So I was like a little bit too much information. However, this girl at the time, I think she was 15 or 16, she she definitely needed somebody outside of her parents to talk to. And I felt bad for her to an extent. So, getting back to the episode, the documentary pauses as Kevin's voiceover comes back on, and he says, "When this video hit, all hell broke loose." It then shows a barrage of comments, at least some of them, that flooded in. Comments like, "I feel so bad for the kid. She is crazy. Her parenting is horrible. These parents are insane. 8 passengers, more like 6 prisoners. She doesn't care about her kids at all. She literally abuses them on camera and hasn't lost custody. Has this been investigated at all? This upsets me so much. She's literally psychologically abusing her family." Kevin then said, "All of a sudden, the algorithm began to recognize, oh, this is a hot topic. So everyone scrambles. Ruby takes the video down. But what I think she was unprepared for was the torrent of pure hatred that came through the door." The documentary then proceeds to show clips of other YouTubers and internet people and personalities expressing their opinions about Ruby's parenting style. In addition to her video regarding the taking away of the bedroom for 7 months, there was a punishment from one video that Ruby posted from her car where she had just received either a phone call or a text message that the youngest Franke child, E, forgot to bring her lunch and asked if Ruby could bring it by the school. Ruby proceeded to say that E is responsible for making and remembering her own lunch, and that if she forgot it, then she has to go hungry. That's what she gets. And she followed that up by expressing her hopes that nobody at the school offers E any food. Otherwise, she'll never learn. Kevin said, "Ruby was devastated." As they show a clip of Ruby crying in her car, Kevin's voice continues, "You have to remember, Ruby was America's mom." It then shows another montage of comments. "You've got to be kidding me. You're a disgusting mother. Bitch, I hope you die in your sleep. Hi, I just wanted to tell you that I hope you rot in hell. You're a disgrace to the LDS community. You should be excommunicated. You are a godless woman. You are sick. What you are doing is abuse. You are a bad mother, horrible mother." And that one was in caps lock. I mean, not the caps lock, right? "You're a terrible mother, absolutely disgusting and vile, stupid effing bitch." As these comments were coming across the screen, Kevin's voiceover was continuing. For her then to be viewed as this abusive monster, it haunted her. We saw it as an innocent religious family that's being attacked unjustly by cancel culture, and cancel culture is winning. Dreamers, I don't have too strong of an opinion about cancel culture. The label gets thrown around a lot these days, and it's not a new phenomenon. Word just happens to travel a lot faster and hits a lot harder than it used to. And you know, in cases like this, I'm okay with cancel culture. These internet personalities really need to be selective in deciding what to put out there for public consumption. And I understand that controversy sometimes brings about higher numbers and in terms of viewers, listeners, and downloads and whatnot. But it really only takes one off-color remark to topple an empire nowadays. And really, the more spectacular the fall, the more spectators will be watching. The documentarian asked of Kevin, "Do you think they had a point? Any of it valid, do you think?" Kevin thought for a moment before he said, "From my perspective now, is any of it valid? Sure. I think a lot of it was valid." And you know what? When I watched this part of the documentary, Dreamers, I kind of didn't believe he fully believed that himself, but I think he was trying to say something that sounded proper and sounded like the right thing to say, But at the same time, I really think he wanted to be honest. I didn't think he wanted to lie on the documentary about and say something like, well, yeah, no, I thought we were doing the right thing, because clearly that wasn't the general consensus. And a lot of people hold him responsible for what ended up happening as well. Anyway, after Kevin said, sure, I think a lot of it was valid, the documentary then shows one of Ruby's video clips. She's filming in the kitchen, but her phone is not being held up. It looks like it's down by her side, or as she has it pointed to the ground, because the kids weren't cooperating in this moment. This was like from 2 years prior to them pissing off 2 million viewers. And we hear Ruby yelling, hold on, hold on. Oh, what was that look for? And we can hear one of the girls say, sorry, I just get nervous. And Ruby fires back, just look, just be yourself. The child says, Mom, that is myself. Ruby deepens her tone and demands, well, change it then. And that statement right there is probably the biggest reason why I don't watch or follow any influencers or reality TV and reality stars for that matter. If being yourself isn't bringing in viewers, then change into someone that drives up the likes and views is utter bullshit. But Kevin insisted he didn't know. But it doesn't sound like the documentarian interviewing truly believes him, as Kevin says. I've learned that there was a whole lot of horror that was going on in the shadows and behind the scenes. But then they show another clip that never aired on their channel. It's Ruby holding her hand up to the camera and showing off a ring. And she's saying, when you are, but then she's cut off by the sound of, I think it's E, her youngest, shouting something or blurting something out. And they're playing in the background when she started talking, but then said something out loud, which caused Ruby to stop. She turns and grabs the child while placing her left hand over her mouth as she forcibly sits her back down in her chair at the table and says, you get down and you be quiet. This is not your turn. Now sit. In the video clip, Ruby is pretty rough. She doesn't hit her, but you know, when you get frustrated with your kids and you kind of handle them more sternly than you normally would or even should, but the hand over the mouth, it was ugly. I don't know. I've never done that to a child. It wouldn't have occurred to me. It's not really hurting, but it just doesn't look or feel right. Usually telling a child to be quiet works. If you're serious and your voice is stern about it, that's usually all it takes. To children, I'll say stuff like zip it or not another word. That's what I say. So right after Ruby says, this is your turn, now sit, we hear Kevin in the video. He's the one filming, and he says, and cut. And he uses finger scissors in front of the camera as he says it. Ruby turned around and said to him, yeah, we're cutting that out. She paused for a moment. She raised her hand with the ring back up to the camera once again as if nothing just happened. I mean, she goes from angry to happy, smiley America's mom on camera in the blink of an eye. It's really bizarre. She continued like she was never interrupted and continued talking about that ring for this video that she was attempting to make. As we're watching her doing that on video, we hear Kevin's voiceover in his interview as he says, I had no idea this was going on in my family. We hear the documentarian then ask, did you really not? Kevin nodded no as he said, no, not to that extent. The documentary goes back to yet another video. Again, the camera's pointed down. You can see a kid passing through the frame, but Ruby is yelling, move it! I mean, all of us at one time or another have yelled at our kids. But we don't put all that mess on our YouTube channels. As parents, we get frustrated and we snap at our kids. I'm not trying to say just because she captured this on video. She didn't air this. This was stuff that was cut out or unaired or never before seen footage. Like there was thousands of hours apparently. But it happens. I'm sure very few of us could sit here and say we parented perfectly and even-temperedly, myself included. But very, very few of us, if any of us, are putting ourselves out there in the world, touting ourselves as America's mom, and making money hand over fist because of this super squeaky clean, God-fearing image, all the while being really mean and abusive. And here with Ruby, ordering her kids to put on a show for her channel. And not doing it isn't an option, as we've come to find out. The children were subjected to physical and corporal punishment even before Kevin and Ruby split up, with Ruby ending up over at Jodi's, living in her massive compound, where the abuse of the two youngest children escalated to the level at which we came to find them having to endure. One of the videos that I believe was published to the 8 Passengers channel that was very troubling and was shown repeatedly after the news of this case broke. It was shown at this point in the documentary towards the end of the first episode. Most of us have seen it, but again, Ruby is disciplining E, the youngest. She's holding a small plush toy. It looks like a cheetah, and the only reason I say that is because my daughter has a favorite stuffed animal cheetah, and it looks kind of similar, except the one in the video is like blue, and my daughter's is like a normal, like brown and tan with spots kind of a cheetah. So anyway, she's holding this small plush cheetah as she says to E, "If you cut one more thing in my house," and Ruby makes her fingers into scissors and puts it around the neck of the stuffed animal, mimicking cutting. And then she says, "I am going to cut your cat's head right off." The child immediately covers her face with her hands and begins to sob. Kevin's voice comes back on, but now it seems like he's making excuses for Ruby as he says, "But I knew that's how it was modeled for her. Love is obedience. But the moment you disobey me, you're going to fear me." And the next thing we see is another unaired video clip with Ruby's screechy voice yelling, "Sit down right here." You can imagine when Ruby's yelling, the camera is wobbly and all over the place, and that's what we're seeing. And we again hear Kevin's voice as he says, in a normal tone in the video, this isn't him in the interview, he says, "Go sit on the couch." Then Ruby yells, "Sit her down on the flippin' couch! Stop it!" It's again the youngest one not cooperating with the filming or whatever it is Ruby's trying to capture. You can see that there's a fireplace going on in the background. It looks like she's trying to gather the kids in their pajamas on the sofa, sitting together in front of the fire in perfect harmony. A nice, quiet, peaceful family night, right? I don't know what she was trying to film, but the kids were not having any of it, and neither was Ruby. Chad comes back on the documentary and he says, "There were times when she blew up off camera. She would spank, whip, take the belt out, whip my butt, pull my pants down and whip me." It then cuts to another video clip. It looks like one of the sisters is getting the Christmas tree set up or something, and Chad is sitting on a step at the bottom of the staircase, looking like his dog just died or something. And we hear Ruby say, "Chad, I've asked you to give me a night where it's enjoyable to be with you." Chad doesn't move or budge or change the sullen look on his face. So Ruby then says, "Chad, take that look off your face and just be happy to be with us." She paused for a moment. Chad stood up, but he almost seemed catatonic. After another moment, we can hear Ruby say, "Okay, you know what then?" At that moment, the camera pans down quickly and goes to black, and we never find out what happens after the "you know what then." Sherry, the eldest daughter, she was still in the foreground of the video clip putting that tree together as her voiceover comes on and she says, I did always feel bad when he got in trouble, He'd get a bloody nose. I'd bring him, toilet paper and didn't really know what to do. He got beat really bad one time, and I helped him clean blood off the walls. We then cut to a clip of Ruby and Chad again. They're sitting next to each other on the couch as she's filming, and she asks, Chad, it is your turn. Do you know where your name came from? And Ruby is laughing and smiling and really super animated. Chad is a bit less catatonic looking. He looks like he's sort of in the moment, but he's staring straight ahead. And when he talks, his eyes start to dart around, and he replied, Grandpa? And he looks into the camera, and he looks like nothing is okay with life, He just looks really lost. And Ruby then says very lovingly, of course you know, Grandpa. So tell us who you're named after. He just did. So I can see this whole thing being super annoying to have to deal with day in and day out with your mom having the stupid camera stuck in your face. Every time she wants to ask you a question, she has to capture the moment just in case something viral, happens. Potentially viral. Chad looks kind of confused as he stares into the camera, and he answers again with one word, Grandpa? Ruby smiles, and then she says, which grandpa? But she didn't give him a chance to answer and says, okay, we're going to try this again. You're going to be a little more talkative here. He glances at her sideways and says, I'm talking, I'm answering your questions. Ruby is exasperated and she sighs. And as they're adjusting to try to film again, we hear voices off camera, which immediately triggers Ruby back into yelling mode as she shouts, hey, if I hear one more word, get out. And then we hear a door shut, and she turns back to Chad and she says, if I'm going to let you vlog, and if I'm going to spend all of my time helping you, you're going to help me too. Be excited to tell them where your name came from, even if you have to fake it, okay? Fake being happy. She paused, but Chad is just, he looks so tired and defeated. He's just a kid. It's a pretty sad moment, and it's a pretty sad look. And, I keep thinking about when this used to be fun, and they would just film their candid moments and how quickly it really spiraled downward into this. After a few moments, Chad finally says, I don't know if I can right now. I don't know why. It's just, I don't. And then Ruby cuts him off, and then the video cuts off. Sherry's voice comes on, and she says, looking back on it, I don't think she was a good person. Looking back on it, I think she was already an abusive mother before, and then obviously it escalated dramatically in the last couple of years. And the fact that Ruby went as far as she did, I wouldn't blame that on Jodi. She just set off things in Ruby that were already in her heart. The first episode of the docuseries ended with Ruby being the one in a near catatonic state, as the female detective who arrested her in August of 2023 is sitting in the interrogation room with her. The officer off camera can be heard telling her, we're just here to talk about you, about kind of a few things involving your kids. And after a moment, Ruby replied, I'll wait till I have a lawyer. Episode 1 of the docuseries ended, so we'll go ahead and end this episode as well. It went a little bit longer than I thought it was, but I got a little more sidetracky than I thought I would. We'll be back shortly with the next part. I wasn't sure how many parts this is going to end up being, but it looks like we'll be able to squeeze out one episode for each part of the docuseries, which is only 3, so it won't take that long. Now, if I were to read Sherry's book and tried to work on this case, we would be here forever. So I refrained purposely from reading the book for now. But if and when I do, I might do an episode to share some of the details that we don't yet know about. If you recall, I was kind of on a book kick for a while after and during COVID as well, but even afterwards, I kept going. And those always have to be multi-part episodes because there's usually so much more to talk about, especially if you have a book that's, a couple hundred pages long, 200 or 300 pages, sometimes 400. But anyway, that is all I've got for this episode. I want you to keep your eyes and ears peeled for part 2, where we will continue our look at the Franke family and the new Hulu docuseries and what more it has to reveal. I want to thank you all so much for listening. I'm your host, Roseanne. It's St. Patrick's Day, so if you're wearing green, you're safe. Until next time, take care and sweet dreams.